This week we sit down with Amy Warren, a seasoned tattoo artist, shop owner, and passionate advocate for industry standards and safety. With over 26 years in the tattoo industry, Amy brings a wealth of knowledge from her early days as an apprentice in Wisconsin to running her own studio in Roswell, New Mexico. Her dedication to cleanliness, transparency, and consumer safety has led her to become an active member of organizations like the Alliance of Professional Tattooists, AFDO, and NEHA. In this episode, Amy shares her journey, insights on regulatory challenges, and why she believes collaboration and education are key to the future of tattooing. Let's buckle in for this episode of The Business of Tattooing. Well, how was your weekend? How have you been?
Yeah, my weekend was awesome. I'm working on some of the conference video editing. So I'm working on some of that, making something out of it or getting it all refined, getting it back to some of the speakers.
Yeah.
Tattooing, always got drawings, always got a lot of things going on.
Yeah. So AFDOs, we'll talk about AFDOs certainly. I mean, we're going to talk probably a lot about regulatory stuff on this interview for sure, but we'll start way back with the basics. You know, I always like to start the interviews with a little bit of your backstory and let the listeners know, who you are, how long you've been in the industry, how you got in the industry, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, I went into art school just thinking it was the one thing that would be worth investing time in, because, some people get to the end of a college degree and they don't end up using it as their career. It happens actually pretty often. And so I just thought if there was something that I could invest in and on the other end feel like I got enrichment, and even if I never made money at it, I would love doing. And that's why I really chose fine art. I didn't know how I would be lucrative at it, but I leaned into, well, I could just always educate or be an educator. So I originally went to school with a BFA, and then sophomore year switched it to an education, thinking, well, I can at least make money as a professor or something and do my fine art on the side, because my goal was to be a fine artist. I'd done when I was maybe a 11, 12, I had an opportunity to play with some clay. In fact, I think I got clay in my hands when I was a kindergartner. They gave us a little lump of clay. You ever make a pinch pot? They like
Yeah.
yes, you make a pinch pot, and I literally think my mom still has that original pinch pot I made when I was in kindergarten. And doing that, I just always had this I want to play with clay thing. And so my mom eventually, when I got to be in junior high, she said, well, there's this public school that does like summer school classes for people that like flunked out of art. If you want to like take it, you can just, you know, you could take the course in the summer and be able to have access to clay. So that's what I did. And I took clay electively like that from when I was 12 years old on. And when I got through high school and had taken a lot of art, a little bit of painting, it was just something that I had already had a relationship with, and it felt good to my system to do. And I friends would ask me for custom or like, sculptures or things. They'd ask me to make stuff for them. So obviously other people were enjoying it too. And there was just something about that relationship with that medium that I really loved. And so when I thought about being, everything, everything on the game of life, right? The lawyer,
Yeah.
all the things that would make money, the doctor. My dad was a PA, so he worked in cardiology. He would always have loved for me to go into that industry. And ultimately, I just thought, if I have to take 4 years of something, like, I better enjoy that, because I just went
Right.
through 12 years of like not being able to be a kid. And
Right.
so I actually really just thought, no, this is my choice. And so that's why I chose art. And after a couple of years into it, I was like, the education side, people are educators. You can see them. They love writing curriculums. They love all of that side of it. And I liked a lot of it, but it wasn't where I thrived. So I just switched back to BFA, and it was kind of a cool little confirmation on that. One of a buddy that I had, a friend of a friend. I was in Portland, Oregon. So I went to Portland State University, and I had been, I'd grown up in Wisconsin. So Portland was totally new to me and different. And I was getting new friends. And one of them said, hey, my buddy just got his finished his apprenticeship. And I'm going to get a tattoo. You want a tattoo? And I literally had never thought of getting a tattoo before at all. Never crossed my mind. I know a lot of people talk about wanting one since they were a kid or seeing one, but maybe I just wasn't exposed to it. The ones that I was exposed to were definitely in the biker lane of it, you know, like the Cherry Creek kind of
Yeah.
random collection, maybe not done in a way that I was like excited or impressed by
Sure.
artistically.
Hmm.
So I thought you had to go in there and like choose a sticker and that's all you got.
You
So
didn't know it could be a completely custom thing.
yeah, I didn't think there was a choice in it, and I didn't think I wanted any of those choices.
Right, right.
So when my friend said that, I was like, yeah, I'll come with you. And then I saw it happen. He was, you know, it's Atlas Tattoo, which is still there. His name's Louis Hess. He's still there. Um, and I just got to watch him draw and paint and turn it into a tattoo. And I was like, sign me up. Let's get something done. And I didn't know what I was going to get. You know,
Did-
and you know, that's kind of the opposite of what you want a client to say, unless they want to collect your work, right?
Yeah.
So I
But
was
did
like,
you just give him total freedom and just be like, yeah, sure, whatever?
so he said, we'll play around, think about it, and come back with something that means something to like, do you got something to inspire me? And I did. I went back and I scribbled on a napkin something that was really just formulaic. It was like a shape that I repeated in a circle. And it was kind of a scrappy little sketch. And he goes, well, let me make it perfect and clean. So he took that little thing and made it perfect, symmetrical. And I was like, no, I like the scrappy sketch look. And so he did it clean and nice. It was like this big of a piece. It's on my spine. It was my first piece, obviously. And I remember thinking like, oh, I think I'm going to cry. Nope, I didn't cry. You know, it was like just on the verge of where I thought, not sobbing, but I did have a tear. And the whole experience, like because he offered art, showed me art, still did the art that I had, I collected what, you know, is precious to me still because I drew it.
Right, right.
So even if no one appreciates it for what it is or cares the same way I do, it does have that connection to me when I was that age and I literally sketched that. So I guess from there on, I said to him after that sesh, I go, can you train me or how do I get trained? I mean, it was that instant. It was within a couple of weeks that I was like, I want to be a tattoo artist. This is it.
Right.
And then he's like, well, I just got trained. So there's no way. And I just, you know, came out the sponsorship or whatever if they did apprenticeships, he's like, they just trained me. So they're not going to take anybody soon. And it was at that, I think it was 99. I was deciding to move back to Wisconsin. It's actually just a personal reason. I really love Portland, but I decided for family reasons, my grandma wasn't doing awesome. I thought I'd go back and hang out with her, and it was a perfect year to do it. And within a couple months, I was at a show. We were at some local concert, and some dude we hung out with some dude that night, and he's like, "Hey, I'm a tattoo artist." And I was like, do you know anybody who's given apprenticeships? And it was that next weekend so it was within a couple, you know, it was this interesting, within 6 months that I asked for it, you know, I went back to Wisconsin and then within a couple weeks of getting home, I lined up with somebody that was interviewing me for an apprenticeship. And I was going to school in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And that's where I got my apprenticeship, was at a shop called Shades of Gray. I was only a girl. They thought that'd be cool that I was an art student and I already knew how to do art,
Yeah.
you know, add a female to the group, but it wasn't really that. It was just I was the only one asking. And so I paid for my formal apprenticeship. It took me less than they thought it would. I think you know, normally apprenticeships can take 6 months to a year. I did put in a lot of hours. Like I think I was doing full time, like at least 40 hours apprenticing. And I got through it in about 4 or 5 months. But um, you know, it was always like, what can you do to get finished? And like, you know, what can you perform, not how long you've been apprenticing. So I
Hmm.
guess I jumped through the hoops, but
Well,
that's
how was your what was your apprenticeship model like? Were you like, because you hear all kinds of different things in terms of apprenticeships, depending on, you know, who the tutor is, you know. So like,
right.
were you doing like the grungy shop work? Were you like doing setups and breakdowns? Were you learning how to make needles? Were you, I mean, like what all was involved in your apprenticeship? Because to progress through an apprenticeship in, you know, 5 months, I feel like is a pretty rapid process, right? So what was your primary focus? You know, what did they have you doing?
Well, Um, everything that you mentioned there. So, from I think I observed, I observed had to clean all the areas that weren't tattoo areas, bathrooms, floors. One day I showed up a little bit um a little bit tired. And I think they made me like literally peel off all those, remember those sticky mirrors that you used to put on the wall? We had a whole wall of them. Remember those little one
Mhm.
by ones?
Yeah, yeah. They're like
They're
mirror
like,
tiles.
yeah, they're like, take those down. We don't want them anymore. And they were all, so that was one of my jobs one day. And I remember that was one of the jobs that I do remember complaining and getting, they worked me pretty hard that day, but so making needles, needles and touching needles and anything in the tattoo studio wasn't the first thing I did. Cleanliness, learning cross-contamination. My apprenticeship was from an artist that I looked up to him. Well, of course it was the only one that was available, but I did check about five different spots in the area. Um, and I did like like as far as personality, we got along great. But when it came to like cleanliness and art, like I know that as soon as I was trained, I was like, let's pump this up just a little bit, but
Yeah, yeah.
so he was kind of an old school dude, just a little bit older than me, but maybe 10 years older than me, but um he taught me a lot about relationship, and having relationship with clients and not just to get a tattoo, just to actually make sure that interaction was something that maybe would later they would come like they didn't have to get a tattoo that next day, but hey, I'll see you later, and I'm come talk to me about a tattoo kind of thing would happen all the time when we were out. And so he taught me how to like talk to people out in the open. Yes, we would go to bars or clubs or anywhere, sandwich shops, and just talk to people. And it wasn't really about, like I said, trying to round up business that day. It was just trying to let people know. So it was a lot of word on the street in 99 when I was taught, and so you try to walk around and talk to people, and that's really how we spread the word. So
Right.
that's one of the things I really got from him. But yes, we learned how to make needles from scratch. We broke down needle bars even afterwards and reuse them. We um, learned to make inks, but I didn't. I can think of only one time we actually made them there. There was another shop that I guest spotted in that really did make their own inks all the time. That was Dragon Moon Tattoo, but they ultimately I did learn how to do that. Even in Portland, I think I was talking to Louie about it. But if you don't know how to make your ink, you don't really know what goes in it. Doesn't mean you have to continue doing it. Same with making needles. But in 99, it was cheaper to make your own needles. And
Right.
I could choose every type of, needle and to make the needle grouping I wanted. And I actually I love that part of it. I don't know if I love soldering, but I loved having exactly what I wanted made
Hmm.
by me, knowing what it was. But again, that was a lot of time, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you also didn't have social media in 99, so you really had to kind of get out and hustle to get people to
Yeah.
come in and get tattooed.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's cool. So how long were you at that shop then after your apprenticeship?
So I was there and until 2003. So from 99 to 4 years. And about 2001, that owner decided to just move and go to a different state. And he kind of left the shop. He was going to either sell it or leave it, and I and the piercing manager decided to buy it. So I was like co-owners of that. We were really, I mean, it was just really the business. We were renting it and all, but so I ran it from 2001 till 2003. And in doing so, that piercing owner decided to, in the same way, he defuncted and decided to do something else. My husband, back in the day, we weren't married, but he was a piercer as well, and so he bought out the piercer, and him and I ran it. The couple of things we did right away was like bloodborne pathogens classes. Actually, I had my dad come in. He was, like I said, he worked in cardiology. So we're like, okay, Dad, come on in. We're going to show you how we set up and pull down and check us on it. Basically give us some kind of a read on if we're hitting everything or if you see any holes. And he actually, the one thing he had for us is like, you could get away with using a few less gloves. You don't have to change out gloves as often. He thought
Okay.
he thought we were tip top. So That until about 2003, I was in Oshkosh, and then we decided to move to Roswell, New Mexico. And so in doing that, we decided to sell the shop, which I did find someone to pick it up for me and keep the clients, under having somebody awesome to go to. And then I moved to Roswell, New Mexico then. And
What year did you go to Roswell? 2003?
yep.
Okay. So, why did you choose Roswell? What, what moved you there?
Well, we had a friend here who is like, so we did want to move. Both of us were like sick of the cold. It's Arctic up there. I think where you're at's a little bit Arctic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. We catch all that lake effect snow. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it was a little too cold for like we were just thinking of moving somewhere else. Just kind of feeling a call to get out of there. Um and there's a few places we were looking at. I was thinking about going back to Pacific Northwest, but a friend in the same time period, almost like a little confirmation, just said, "Hey, if you ever want to come down here and help me do he was doing conferences on UFOs and aliens and paranormal stuff. But from
Sure.
kind of a cool direction, like from the researcher side, or like less of the balloons and like gimmicky, like silly side of it, more of like
Right.
researcher side of it. And there wasn't a lot of that represented here. So we thought it was a really cool thing to be part of. So we just came down to Roswell not knowing how long we were going to stay. But we did sell a shop and put all of our stuff in a trailer and drive it down and like make the real move, not knowing if we would stay here or how long we'd be doing that. So we did that for 10 years. We put on conferences. In the first year that we moved here, I lined up with a shop in Albuquerque because we're in a town about 50,000. So it's not a huge place. There was a couple shops of which I didn't really think I wanted to work at. One of them I did offer to like, if you could like, jump up and get some cleanliness going on here and we could work together, that'd be cool. But he's kind of old school. And basically I just decided I wanted to work up at Tinta Cantina, which was a custom shop. I think they claimed to be the only custom shop back in 2003 in Albuquerque. I don't know that that was actually the case, but they were one of them that everybody in the shop drew. There was, of course, some cool personal flash on the walls, but it was not a flash shop. It was just custom. And that's really what was my initial goal when I started, is like everything I'm going to do, I'm going to draw. I had a ton of flash on the walls. I like to collect flash that, was an art form. There's
Hmm.
lots of people that do amazing flash. So I
Yeah,
like to
yeah.
collect it and have it. And it's an honor to do it, especially the old, especially something that was done well and maybe by the sailors that aren't around anymore. But either way, when I got here, I really wanted to stick into that custom crowd, and Tinta Cantina took me in. So I worked there for a little over a year before I started my shop here in Roswell.
Yeah, that's cool. How going back to Wisconsin in the 99 area, because you were pretty focused on cleanliness and I want to get into that obviously and talk about your passion around that. But how are the regulations in Wisconsin in 99? Did you guys have pretty strict regulations in the tattoo space there?
Well, strict is probably, maybe we needed to find that we're strict.
I
Uh,
mean, was the Board of Health coming in there and checking things out? And were
yeah,
you
so they
required to have bloodborne pathogens and stuff like this?
not bloodborne pathogens, just have a shop that was devoted to tattooing and had probably a business license that, meant they were taking business in. The shop had to have an owner that was an artist, and the artists that worked there had to be signed off by them.
But
And that
what is
that was
artist artist by what definition? Like you're an artist with a
oh,
degree in art,
right.
so you're technically a certified artist, so like how do they qualify who's the artist in the shop?
Sorry, yeah. So you would actually have a number and a license next to your name. They wanted to observe you setting up and pulling down.
So they qualified the artist. They said, okay, this person's the qualified artist in this shop, and this is the person that can green light whoever else is working in the shop.
If you were, yeah, the owner that was, I believe that's how it went. The owner, because when I wanted an apprenticeship, so it was a health department. Um, and let's think about, or say this right now. So there's federal, then there's state, then there's local, county. And health departments are the ones that regulate and govern the counties.
Mm-hmm.
So in that state, it's the health department, which means every county goes in and regulates individually by the county. So in that county, they would give the shop, like Shades of Grey had a license, and then the owner had a license, and then well, because he went through the whatever standards regulations they had, they were checking off. But what I remember them doing was coming in, watching you set up, watching you pull down, looking where you had your supplies. I don't know if I don't know if we ever posted like our inspection sheet, but they definitely had an inspection they were doing, but more to the shop when it was opened, and then per each artist as they were green lighted or green
Okay.
light. So when I went through my apprenticeship, of course, I had to go through that. I actually go through a practical inspection, and then I got my license. So um, the standards there, I guess, when I compare it to other places, they were decent. Yeah, they were decent. I don't remember them no, the bloodborne pathogens was not part of a regulation requirement. I just knew we were dealing with blood, so I wanted to give that to my shop. So I always would just make it available for my shop. So we would often do the first aid, bloodborne pathogens, and CPR. And that's just because, being with a person in the case that they need first aid or CPR, or knowing what to do and how to call for help in the case that somebody would need an ambulance, and then understanding what is cleanest to dirtiest, and what
Right.
you can either contract with blood, and understanding that a machine, how we don't, some people call them guns.
Yeah. We don't like that word.
And I don't love that, but I will refer to it and just say that they are a loaded weapon.
True, true.
We should treat them like a weapon,
Yeah, we
because they
should
can,
handle them safely like we handle a weapon safely.
right. We should
Yeah.
respect them with the same respect we have a weapon that could harm or hurt somebody, and that we're wielding, so even though my intention is to make a beautiful piece of art, I mean, that's really what I want for that person too, but that's my goal. I
Yeah,
machine, and I hope that I can get in and out of there without hurting them or myself. And if I can do that, then we can have fun tomorrow. But if
right.
I can't do that, I can't do this forever. I can't get, so I want to stay clean. I want my family to stay clean. I want my clients to stay clean. I want them to come back. Of course, other than that, that's just the bare grass, like minimum, them having something that doesn't fade, and them having something that doesn't infect them or doesn't have any kind of adverse long-term effect,
Right.
even if it's an allergy or sensitivity, and understanding that is important, so.
Yeah, so how it's interesting because like I think back to like when I started, tattooing in shops and stuff like that. And I think like particular to my area and traveling all over the world, I see all these different things in different states and in even different counties in different states, like where I'm at, there's no real oversight here in my county particularly.
Hmm,
But if you go the next county over, it's really strict for tattoo artists over there as far as licensing and requirements and things like that.
hmm,
So it's really interesting from a county by county scenario. But even thinking back into the 90s, like what you're saying, it's not like anybody was really enforcing any of that kind of stuff. So you really had to either be a person that was already passionate about safety, and that maybe started with your own personal safety and just wanting to be safe yourself, because you're dealing with, like you said, blood and body fluids and things that can be harmful. So just being educated on that front is important. Even when I started tattooing, I got hepatitis vaccinations. I went to the doctor and I said, "Oh, I want to get a hepatitis vaccination because I'm working with people's blood all the time, and I know hepatitis is a big bloodborne disease, so I don't want to open myself to any risk of that." But that wasn't because anybody told me I should do that. That was just because
hmm,
I inherently knew of the dangers of that, and I didn't want to be open to exposure of that. So I took it upon myself to do that. But even when I started tattooing, they weren't forcing us to go get bloodborne certifications or first aid or any of that stuff. They did start doing that eventually, but it wasn't a big thing in the 90s for sure. So what really, because knowing everything I know about you now after I've known you for a period of time, I know how passionate and you know, um, intertwined you are into the safety side of tattooing. So what really, what was really your catalyst to that? Because you mentioned a couple times already, in the shops that you were working in, it didn't seem like cleanliness or this kind of stuff was really a priority in some of these places. You're like, hey, let's step it up here a little bit. What was the what was your motivation behind that? I mean, why was that really so important to you?
Putting my client first, giving them literally the best thing that they can get. But some of it I think is necessary. And I saw a gross neglect.
Did that come from your own personal experience? Like, because you didn't have a tattoo, you didn't really, you said, well, I never even really thought about getting a tattoo. But when you went to get a tattoo and when you started visiting tattoo shops, was this like as a tattoo collector or a potential a consumer that wanted to get tattooed? When you went into a tattoo shop, did you see something that was kind of like a red flag to you and you were like, whoa, I don't know about this? Was that kind of like maybe what?
Actually, I think, that I do say that being a collector has sharpened or honed or um, furthered my passion for caring because I want to collect it too. And in that, I think cleanliness and ink are huge for me. But my first experience was a really good one. So I didn't really see the gross neglect there. I started seeing that gross neglect when I was being trained and when I started going to conventions and going into other shops as a tattoo artist, knowing I was going to have to perform it. So I think the biggest part of that, if you will, ethical layer started when I was apprenticing. And I actually was put like, now I have to do it to my mother, do it to, do it to someone that I care about or to my, or
Mhm.
and I put my client, if I kind of try to treat everybody like I'd want to be treated, so when I started understanding what's really going on, of course I knew ink was in me when that I had, but I didn't ask my first tattoo artist, what's your standard? I didn't have all those checks in me immediately as an 18, 19-year-old. Um, and I think I was in a place that I could see they were thinking of things I wouldn't have thought of. But when I thought, well, I'm going to have to do this, how do I throw that sharp thing out without poking my finger? I think is what really got me wanting to, like, where I started kind of saying there needs to be some standards in line here for me because, and then it applied to my collecting.
What you said your husband was a piercer and you had a piercer in your shop. Were they involved with APP?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I feel like the piercing scene has always been pretty focused on like just standards and procedures and safety. Like I feel like the piercing side of the industry's always been really focused on that. So was your husband also like when you guys took the shop over together and was your husband already like kind of ahead of the game in regards to that kind of stuff with being a piercer?
Yeah, I think actually both of us had that same drive. A part of it's liability. Well, there's a couple things. When you're running a shop, you want to make sure that you're giving your client informed consent, right? Anything that I need to know to make sure that they don't get hurt in the process needs to happen on the front end. And then we could do a cool tattoo. Then we can do a cool piercing. And answer your question directly. We both had that kind of drive of like, we're not going to do it if it puts anybody at risk. And so, yeah, I'm trying to remember if he was part of APP has really high standards and some of it's jewelry. And so I'm trying to think, I know that he was aligned with APP and, I was an APT as well. The Alliance of Professional Tattooists was around, obviously. Um, and I think for a little bit, there was another organization. I think having an organization of safe any industry, right? Any practitioners is a great thing, or a coalition of a group
Sure.
of people to kind of get together and hone their skills together. I mean, best practices always happen in your shop, what you decide to do, but just to kind of have those out there. I think APP, you're right, it has always been focused on that. And so we both were like, if we're going to do this, it's going to be right. We're not going to have, I think maybe even when I bought the shop, I was like, wow, now it's me. Now I'm like the
Now you're the responsible person.
no, I'm the yeah, and these guys are gonna either come back and be happy or come back and not be happy. And I want to on the front end make sure that we've gotten everything we can, we did everything we could do to make sure that they're happy. So a client having that informed consent, a fair deal that I tell them everything that I know that they need to know before we start. All of that looks like having a really good consent form, aftercare, even the pre-care discussions. And like I said, kind of if it's elective and it's going to hurt them or for any reason they aren't suited for it, to just wait until they are, and so we both did have those standards. Our the people that worked for us, which were other artists, some of them did and some of them didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And actually some of them that didn't were really excited when they learned it, oh, but they were just a couple of them had been working for 6+ years, just slinging ink, buying ink from, the Hobby Lobby of the day, buying everything off the shelf that wasn't really intended for the use.
Right,
and,
right.
and not really thinking about anything other than the art, and so
Yeah,
I kind of thought that was like an interesting, that wasn't easy. That wasn't what my experience was going through apprenticeship. Like I really checked myself on all of that. Like, no, I'm going to be liable for all this if I do anything wrong. So I think that's where I started I actually wondered if I'd get through my apprenticeship halfway through.
really.
I had to start pulling out some textbooks and getting some advice from people that knew where I was putting what I was putting, because there wasn't a lot of information on that.
Sure.
And I was like, so what are we doing here? You just poke it in, then pretty picture, and then they come back and it's healed. I'm like, yeah, but like where? Like, to not understand that side of it,
Right,
I had to know that. So maybe I'm a
right.
curious bird or something, but
It was
I
just
think,
all very surface level education.
yeah, my brother-in-law is a microbiologist. He has 2 degrees in genetic engineering is the other one. And my sister's a PA. And so when I was going through that apprenticeship, I remember saying, can I come over for a weekend and just pick your brains because I need to know some stuff. And so they pulled out some PubMed journals and were able to kind of tell me exactly like what was happening more on a molecular level. And then I was like, okay,
Right.
I get it. Okay, that's what I'm doing. That's a good plan. Okay, it's going to stay there. It's intended to stay there. Um, you know, I didn't think too hard about it, but as far as it being transient and what that could do for the whole system negatively, I thought about it more from an artist, like from an archival point of view. Like, is
Mm-hmm.
this going to stay? When I tell them it's permanent, is it really going to be permanent? Or like, I want them to be happy. So, and I also want to do something once and not have to, go into the skin twice and hurt that. But then now, I mean, as the years went on, I started thinking, oh, if it leaves the skin or if it leaves the area, I always thought, well, it's just coming out of the skin somehow, just getting the sun's just lightening it. But the more I understood about that, it actually sometimes gets transient and goes into other parts of your body. That's when, I started paying a lot more attention to ink quality and ink safety.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to get into that some too. But before I get off onto that topic, I did want to touch base on like because we're talking about the APP, and I will say that from an observatory standpoint, in all the years that I've been in the industry, I definitely see it's very interesting to me how, in my mind, the piercing industry's really gone a lot further in regards to safety standards and practices, I feel like, than the tattoo industry has. Because like I'll get people all the time asking, or I'll see them on social media asking for recommendations for piercers. And
Mhm.
one question that almost always comes up when people are looking for piercers is they'll say, "Are they APP piercers?" They'll want to know like, are they in that organization? Because from consumer people that actually are getting piercings or body modifications, they're
Mhm.
educated consumers. Like they know that people that are in APP are very highly qualified and trained
Right.
professional piercers, you know, and they only want to go get pierced by those individuals, you know. So like, but on the contrast, I don't I don't hear that a lot in the tattoo space, you know, like if somebody's going to get a tattoo from somebody, they don't say, "Hey, are they a member of the APT? Are, you know, are they qualified through a professional trade organization?" You know, nobody asks that ever, you know what I mean?
Do you
So
ever think they,
what's that?
do you ever think they even, are they even asking, are they licensed? Are they doing
No,
it the clean
I
way?
don't
What
think
kind of
so.
ink are they using? Yeah,
No, I don't think so.
interesting.
Which is interesting, and I never had really thought about that before our conversation just now. But I do notice it a lot, even if it's a subconscious notice. You know what I mean? Like, um, but I do know how much work is going into the tattoo side of things today to try to get to that level in the tattoo industry. So it's not to say that we're not trying to get there. It's just interesting in contrast how much further along the piercing industry's gotten in that regard, you know? And I never really thought about that before, but it is a true statement, you know? And it makes me wonder why, you know? Why is it like that? So that's interesting. But anyways, because now fast forward to today, you not only do you own a tattoo shop and you've been tattooing for a number of years now, but you're a member of the APT, you're a member of AFDO, you're a member of NEHA, and you're very active in all these groups. So you're not just focused on tattooing every day, you're very heavily focused on industry standards and safety and a very strong focus on consumer safety. You know, like you just said it a minute ago. I
Mhm.
care about my clients. I want to make sure that what I'm doing to my clients is a positive thing. I want to know what I'm putting into them. So what really got you on that trajectory and even even to the point to where you want to qualify all of the products that you use as safe? Because I don't see a lot of that going on in the industry today either. You know, it's like most artists base what they use on based on what their favorite artist is using. You know, like, oh, I love this artist and he uses this ink, so this is the ink I'm going to use, and that's their qualification process. But for you,
Right.
it goes much further than that and much deeper. So, what really got you going there? I mean, because that's a lot.
Yeah, in when I came to Roswell, there wasn't any standards in this state. So that was 2003. There was zero law or regulation. Then 2000, I was making a case for like maybe we should. I saw a lot of unlicensed work. I saw a lot of people coming in with some really undesirable effects. Now, I saw that as well in Wisconsin. It wasn't like moving here was a big difference. I think we all see that as artists in a shop. We'll see people bringing stuff in, but I thought not having any regulations, I did see more of. It was constantly, you know, it was the only way, you know. So I saw a lot of undesirable things. I did see some people, you know, having more than just a fade or, you know, just an issue with the artwork. You know, I saw people have other issues, infection, things like that. Of course, unlicensed activity isn't always solved by having regulation either, you know. So it was, to me, it was something that I mean, I've been working for 26 years now, so it's like it took time for my policy to happen, right? My policy started with a couple lines, and then it turned into like the more I realized I could help someone or something could happen in my shop that I needed to pay attention to, I wrote a policy, right? Well, I think over the years I've kind of grown closer and closer to what you're describing as far as my passion or what I'm now doing as far as trying to be a profession specific voice for our industry. Part of it has to do with, you know, our industry has also boomed. I think for probably 15 years, it was the top 3 or 5 industries, like growing industries.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a huge increase, and I think we've seen an increase in ink manufacturing. I think we've also seen things happen in Europe with ink manufacturing. in when did that start? The early 2000s, so since 2000, the first study that I saw on ink was a Danish study. I think it was done in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
2006 or 2011. I forget. There's a couple different studies, but the first one I think was 2006 that I saw. And then as more like 5 or 10 year, like long clinical studies were going on, I read that stuff and paid attention to it. And so I realized that there were adverse events. We can talk about that later, but there were things that could hurt, or that I did need to understand was in my ink, and I wasn't going to be, again, putting something in my client. I say those that I love because I tattoo my family, but I love my clients too.
Right.
I love everybody, but um,
Yeah.
I just mean, like, so I guess I started learning about stuff like, early on that was happening in Europe, and being, wanting to be educated. And when my state, I guess for a few years, I was petitioning to our local city, just like, hey, maybe we should consider regulations. This is how it would help. We could just take somebody else, basically we could adopt somebody else's ideas. Just like you're saying, in your county, they might not have great regulation, but you could adopt the county that next door that does.
Right.
So that was I kept kind of petitioning. And then one year in 2008, the state decided to adopt state laws. And then those became rules. And so then we were able to get licensed under the state. So the state has a few inspectors and they come around the whole state, but it's not like yours where every county does it individually. The state is all on one page.
Right.
Now, I also noticed that it didn't really change a lot of that unlicensed activity. The enforcement wasn't enforcing on unlicensed activity. So the enforcement was happening on only those that would submit to it, and so there was a lot of that where people were like, I don't need to do that. I've been doing it safe ever since then. And, ever since, sorry, I've been doing this safe for 20 years. So why do I need a license to tell me I'm safe? And I saw all those arguments and I was part of those discussions. I do think that one of the strongest things, one of the most important things we can do is continue to have these discussions. So thanks, because I think throughout the years, that's kind of what helped me get in touch with what mattered and to continue to stay, I guess, relevant or educated on what was being, because, it's a modern world. We have new information
Right.
all the
Right.
time. And back in 2000 aughts, we didn't have the kind of internet we couldn't get connected to things as quickly as we can now, but it was
Right.
definitely out there.
We
My
didn't have
husband,
that database at our fingertips.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And now we had a way to get to it, but it just wasn't as accessible. And so I think that was one of the things I saw, gross neglect. And, unlicensed activity is one thing. We can talk about it in two ways. One is cleanliness of the process, which is what NEHA deals with, right? So NEHA is practically how we put ink in the procedure that the tattoo artists do. And then AFTO is the products. And so both things I care about, but you can't twain them really. So
Right.
an unlicensed artist is going to give you probably both of the negative, they're not going to be doing it clean, maybe, they're at least not submitting to somebody who can come in and inspect them. And then the inks themselves, let's just say I was unlicensed. Well, I wouldn't be able to buy from the companies that only sell to licensed artists.
Right.
There's a lot of companies that always said you have to have a license and show us that before we'll sell to you, because this is for professional use only.
Right.
So the people that that aren't using licenses or aren't working with a license, and they go and acquire equipment, they're getting it from some source that may or may not actually be. It's probably, it could be adulterated. It could be clean sharps. We've had a lot of recalls over the years. Some of them were like needles that they actually went and swab tested them because they had a little bit of an issue, and noticed there was a lot of people coming back with some, health issues. And they found out it was kind of located in this one area of a big city where people were doing some unlicensed tattoo parties, and they happened to get big rash of the same sterilized, packeted equipment, and they swab tested them and they had germs on them, like in a sterile packet.
On the needles.
Yeah. And so if you buy something from China or I don't mean to blackball that company, I'm just
Right.
you buy something from somewhere, you don't have a source, you don't know the source. Well, from Amazon or from any distributor, a lot of that stuff that's coming out of houses or wherever they're happening without licensure or oversight, they often weren't just an unclean thing, they were an unsafe ink as well or product. So I think both of them like were a concern. And when my clients would come to me, part of it is like, hey, this is the product I give you. Let's talk about that first. I know you have this like screaming awesome idea, but let's just like talk about what's happening in the chair, and then once we get through that, then we can just talk about your art. But what I give is somebody, I'm using standard ink. What I mean by that is I'm looking for something in it that doesn't have any doesn't have, if the allergens are, if they have any allergens in the ink, it should be on the label. I do a consent form to make sure someone's healthy. If they have allergens, we consider those things. And then that we're not going to put, plastics and heavy metals and things that we know to be harmful to the skin or to the human body. Because the thing is, we don't need to have those things. And they're in a lot of manufacturing there's gross neglect in just the manufacturing process. AFTO is, if I can just like rabbit trail for a second on AFTO, there's a really good book called The Poison Squad. I think we may have talked about that book, Rob. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with that book?
I've heard it. I have not read it, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that we've talked about it.
It's just the history of what was happening when in the pre 1900, late 1800s, with adulterated like products, like food products. So I won't get into all
Oh,
the nitty gritty, but
I do remember they were talking about that at the AFTO conference specifically this year. But it was in the big group in the opening kind of ceremony.
right.
One of the AFTO people actually brought that book up.
And I'm going to answer that question with what we're talking about as far as considering what's in the ink that we're implanting in someone's skin. It's done in all other industries, food,
Drugs.
drugs. When it comes to vitamins,
Well, drugs to some degree, but we don't even have to get into that. I mean, I see these dumbass infomercials for drugs all the time, and then at the very end, they're like, may cause cancer, may cause liver failure, may cause blood. You're just like, what? Why are
well,
you selling this?
at least it's fair, right?
But I mean, they're not really giving us that opportunity in the tattoo space. I mean, they're not saying, oh, sure, you can keep making those inks the same way, but you have to put all these disclaimers, like, and you can keep selling it if you do that. So why? So that's where I question, like, come on, like, you guys are allowing these drug manufacturers to sell this shit that's clearly can really fuck you up if you have experienced some of these side effects. But you want to scrutinize ink manufacturers over these little, what seem to be really minor details in a lot of cases. You know what I mean?
Um, I know exactly what you mean. In fact, I might push back on that and say, I don't know. I want you to tell me what you know about that you think they will do that, because I'm kind of hoping that we come up with some kind of a positive list, not a ban or negative list, and come up with a consensus view, an industry consensus, that shows we do understand a way and a path to make a safe ink. And if there's allergens or if there's anything that needs to be disclosed, we can do that and we can put it on the label, and everybody's, an adult usually that gets this anyways, but that's part of it. I think, because it's not like there's zero liability with getting a tattoo. You need to think about sun exposure later. There's some aftercare, life aftercare, if you will, on it, but yeah, I'm wondering if it's really gonna get to that level where they're saying you can't just because it's XYZ. I would expect it looks like a cigarette box later that says, hey, we've done our math
Yeah,
and now
I
we can
agree.
disclose to you and give you a fair deal and tell you what is in are the ingredients. I would think that'd be a good starting point for it. The thing that I do understand about I don't want to rabbit trail too hard from where you're asking, but what I do understand about regulation And let's just think about, you have a county that doesn't regulate where you're in, or doesn't regulate too hard, and then you have one over here that does. Well, let's just back up and think about more federal regulation. It's the same thing though. They make a assertion about something that would be public safety, and that would look like the law or MoCRA, right? And and then regulation comes from that. So it's up to us really to keep that seat at the table, right? And to show up.
Right.
Regulation happens, like FDA, I think what historically has been part of this process, because what's happening with our industry is it's maturing.
Right.
Manufacturing, because of the huge leap in the amount of production and collection, it's getting to the next step where now as industry, we need to show up and, like I said, have a consensus view available and present that to through AFDO, through, if there was a coalition of ink manufacturers or something where, through AFDO to present, hey, this is what we think is a good idea. We've been doing it. We Rob, we've been talking about self-regulation. A lot of people like to talk about self-regulation, but I would just take it the next step into self-standardization.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you on all that.
Because it's regulation, and then, we make some standards from that. And standards look like something that I can wrap my mind around, and I can take to my specific individual shop or manufacturing facility if we're talking about products, and now I can apply it and make my safety plan. Because safety plans are always going to be individual for the, space that you're in. And I do think that that's the one way that we can actually serve our industry. And the legacy of that could look like, us actually having the voice for whatever regulation they create. I think if we say what we want to be created, it will get created. I think if we don't say anything, FDA is going to have to create something, and we might not like it.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
that's what spurred me on when I was here in Roswell. We didn't have any regulation. I was like, please, let's do can we be part of it? And then when 2008 happened and the state got regulation, I said, I was in the same camp trying to find other people around that cared. There were some people that cared. There's a board of body art for body art regulation here in the state, and their representatives are people in industry and regulators. I applied and was chosen to be on that board from 2017 to 19. It's a governor appointed position, and I was representing establishments. So they had a law that some of the rules weren't totally updated, or they weren't even totally fleshed out. So I was on like the rules committee, and licensing I helped out with, and a little bit about, in the I did some public hearing stuff where I had to hear some of the complaints. And so that was my intent there, was to help be there in the moment when things were being created, so that we could have a industry specific regulation. And I do think that that's possible for what we're talking about with ink and AFDO.
Yeah. I've been, it's interesting that you got involved with AFDO because you're not a product manufacturer, right? So like, but you were an artist that cared about transparency in the products that you were using, and you saw a gap there. So you wanted to get involved with that, right? You wanted to better understand that. It was interesting for me too, going to the AFDO conference this year for the first time, because I just started getting involved with AFDO, a couple of years ago. Before that, I was with CTS. I had this call to action from a couple of the ink manufacturers in the space, and I wasn't even an ink manufacturer back then. I was manufacturing products. I've been manufacturing products in the tattoo space for a long time. I just started getting into ink manufacturing a few years ago, so but I had cared about good manufacturing practices long before that. I had always paid attention, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing things right and safely, and I'm not just mixing stuff up in my back of my shop and putting it in a bottle and sticking it out for people to use. I realized the responsibility that came with making products that you intend to sell to consumers. There's a massive responsibility that comes with that part of things. And I see a big disconnect in the industry in regards to that. Even in the ink manufacturing space, there's a lot of stark contrast from one manufacturer to another manufacturer in regards to the ingredients that they use, transparency on what's in the bottle versus what's on the label. And that's not pulling the curtain back on anything that's not already public knowledge. I mean, there are already published reports where they've pulled ink off of a shelf and tested what's in the bottle to what's on the label, and they found discrepancies there, right? So we already know there's some non-transparency issues going on in the manufacturing space. But that's not just in tattooing. I mean, that we even learned in the AFDO conference this year. They were just that book you were just talking about. That's exactly what it talks about. It talks about even back early 1900s, and even before that, people weren't telling the truth about what was in their products.
It's an age-old thing.
Right.
Have you ever heard the term unequal weights and measures?
Yes.
Do you know where that came from? Like, I mean, back in the day,
No.
you go to the guy. I wasn't there, but I'll tell you what I know about history.
You
Is
might have
that
been there in another life.
is that you'd come to somebody to buy and sell, right? You take your grain. Maybe I don't know if everybody had their own little weights or whatever, but there was somebody with a scale, and then they put like a 10-pound weight on one side and your 10-pound of grain on the other side. Well, they used to change this 10-pound weight to be 9 pounds or whatever.
So they'd short you a pound of grain.
So this was a normal thing. How are you going to know what scale are you going to use to check
Right.
the scale? So that was something that traders throughout, like we're talking the last, 5,000 years, this has been a problem in trade.
Right.
It's actually an age-old thing. So, is there anything new under the sun? Probably, but in this day and age, there's lots of, but basically there's nothing really, that's not a
Yeah.
concept. And, I did see in the tattoo industry when so I started asking back in 99, I would ask, what's in the ink? I knew from, like I said, my research was if you put something in the skin that was foreign, the skin would address that and keep it if it was organic enough that it could live with it.
Right.
We also know, like, if you get a splinter in, that's organic, but it's like this foreign thing that, like, maybe physically, I'm not a doctor, but maybe physically doesn't fit there, so it tries to push it out physically. But when you get something implanted in that, you're putting it straight into the skin, and it's small. Well, a macrophage, like envelops it, and then the T cell comes by and is like, "Is it okay?" And they're like, "I think it's okay. It's 99.99% organic." Remember, that's what I used to get told by my ink companies, and I'd think, well, there's only 0.01 of something else, so that's something that's a starting point.
Yeah.
That was always my standard. And when I had a company say, "Oh, don't worry about it," kind of thing, then I started asking a little bit more, like, because I knew what an MSDS sheet was. And I say all this because I think it's something that I noticed, some ink distributors or manufacturers were like honest brokers about it, and some weren't. They were actually a little bit more like hesitant and would ask, so there was like a little bit of this pushback. And I think part of that made me curious and wanted to align with those companies that were like, I'm proud of my ink. Just like, if someone walks in my shop, I'm like, here's my license. See that?
Right.
See that expiration date? It's not gone yet. Do you want to see my
Right.
most recent inspection? Do you want to see that? What else do you want to see? The ink? Like, I can tell you, here's my ink, C of A's or SDS sheets. At least I know per color what is in this ink. And I can tell you in case you have an allergy or in case you care or we ever need to go back to it. And ultimately, this stuff doesn't need to be known to them on the front end, like every little nitty gritty, but that I know it needs to be on the front end. And then if anything ever happens, we actually can do a trace back. So that's
Right.
the whole goal of any of this is like, if something happens, we know we can maybe kind of find out how it happened so we can stop it next time.
Right.
And so I think all of this is good things that can kind of build our professionalism. Like, I think it will verify the manufacturers. It'll give them something to put, to get an audit is like, I'm so proud if I'd have an audit on my wall. Now, let me tell you something that I don't know if you know this about me, but in 2020, my husband and I, well, we went through 2020 like everybody else, right? And we're artists, and he does fine art and he does glass blowing. So he was a shop manager, glass blowing. He actually does some other fine art as well. He does macro photography of his glass, and some of it's on the wall behind me. So he does some really cool work. But when it was when the whole gallery thing shut down and everybody was kind of like, "Hey, we don't know what's happening this year," it really set us I started wondering what else I could do with my skills, and apply them if for some reason I couldn't tattoo because I had thought I had job security as a tattoo artist.
Right. Until
Yep.
COVID came.
I remember I knew somebody who had a great job. They had the retirement and everything. And I was like, psh, he was wondering if he was going to lose his job. And I was like, I don't ever have to wonder that.
The business of tattooing is brought to you by Electrum Supply, the industry leader in high-quality tattoo supplies designed by artists for artists. Whether you need premium stencil products, top-tier cartridges, or game-changing aftercare, Electrum has you covered with innovative, artist-tested solutions you can trust. Want to elevate your work? Head over to electrumsupply.com and stock up on the best gear in the business. And because you're a listener of the business of tattooing, use code podcast10 at checkout for 10% off your next order. Stay sharp, stay stocked, and stay ahead with Electrum Supply.
And I wasn't being negative about it. I was just like, that's a cool thing about, being self-employed. We got to remind ourselves of the bonuses, because it's hard work.
Yeah,
And, it could be one thing one month and one thing the next month. We really do have kind of an interesting dance we do as far as owners and being artists. But we decided to learn and do an apprenticeship to do indoor we do oyster mushrooms, but gourmet mushroom growing. Did you know that about me?
No.
Okay. So we did a apprenticeship, and then we actually worked under a consultant who knows how to plan and engineer a specific facility and plan your farm for you. So we did it as a trial. We found out we liked it. We thought, well, why don't we do something other than our elective jobs, that if something happens like this again, we need some source of income. And ultimately we had always fiddled around with thinking we could do something on our land. We have about 70 acres, and just thought, we love feeding people. We had done a little bit of organic produce in the past. We had a neighbor who's doing organic produce, and we were selling to a little local, restaurant, and just kind of playing around with things. My parents got goats when I was a kid, just for fun, just so we could drink goat's milk and be healthy, which made me like the uncoolest kid in kindergarten when I'd open that thermos and there was warm goat's milk from that morning in it.
Oh, God.
But
you grew up loving it.
So my mom was a little bit on the if we can do it healthy, let's do it. And so either way, I kind of had a little bit of that in my background, and I was open to doing a little farming. And so when we started that farm, we really just thought, well, we want to feed people, and we want to actually, mushrooms are really good for our brain. They're good. There's lots of things, adaptogens we get from mushrooms. It's a great food source, good protein source. So we started that. A couple of years into it, we realized we wanted to get with a distributor or try to be available for that. So we went through a third-party audit. We had someone that was a consultant, on my side, helping me look at all the standards that the regulations required from the law for food. And I put together a safety plan. And then I took all the standards and created, what looks like my manual and my SOPs and my checklists and everything that meets literally an itemized standard specifically for the food that I'm making. Now mushrooms, it's funny, were not a commodity there that was had a line item. They were actually the specialty thing out there in a big box of specialty stuff, meaning anything that didn't fit under carrots, beans, button mushrooms or other things. What the kind of mushrooms we did was in this little specialty camp. And then in 2022 or 3, right around the first audit we had, I think it was 22, maybe 21, 22, we were put in from the federal level. They decided the commodity was large enough. Actually, what happened in 2020 was that our exchange with China on mushrooms went down. sorry to bore you with mushrooms, but it does apply here in a second. So,
No, I like it.
um, so we, as Americans, we started being a producer. The high, I guess, we jumped up on being number one producer for America. Up until that point, China was the number one producer for mushrooms. So there's a lot of people that are starting to jump on this bandwagon of producing mushrooms in the last 5 years or so. It's kind of interesting. And so when that happened, all of that fueled this commodity being not this specialty item. They actually wanted to make a line item called gourmet mushrooms on, the all the
Yeah,
federal stuff. It even
yeah,
has to do with taxes. So when they did that, they took those, they're starting to actually create standards now that aren't totally finished, I don't believe, just for specifically indoor gourmet mushrooms. So I say all that because I went through a year of doing that work. And that was about the year before I joined AFTO. And I realized that inks are going to have to go through the same process, that all of those standards and those good practices, those safety plans are all, it's everything across the line is going to be applicable to inks. And I understood that process. And I felt like I was thriving in it a little bit. And I actually, it was funny because I've had FDA people, we have FDA inspectors come to our farm, and we also have we hire someone to come and give us the audit to also check us on those things. And I enjoy both of those visits. Um, if you greet them with a plan, they really allow for you to show them those things and to inform them if they aren't, because this is, again, the type of mushrooms I'm doing isn't very common, or it hasn't been really common up until this point. And so those regulators are usually interested. And so I'll just say my audits, the audited, we call them harmonized gap audits. So they're good agricultural practices instead of good manufacturing practices. But I'll just say, like, that consultant set me up for success, so I could meet those FDA people and meet my auditor with a stack of things that I knew they were expecting. And we've had a great relationship. And it's actually, if anything, bumped me up to even a better level. I understood, like, I thought that my manual was great. I had like a 50-page manual. And then when I, created my farm safety plan, I had already done all that stuff. Like, I had taken all the classes, gone through FSMA, gone through Product Safety Alliance and all that. But when you go through those audits and you actually get, you really do make for your company the best practice that you can come up
right.
with. And just going through those traceability and understanding what it's like to pull a product from a shelf, I feel like that has set me up for success for the AFTO crowd, because I really know what they're looking for in that way. They want something in the drawer that gives the producer specific instructions on how to make their own safety plan. And as a tattoo artist, I feel like there's also that in the lecture or presentation we did at AFTO, practical agreements was the part that would fit for tattoo artists. So I still think there's this side that I've been doing with ink companies that I feel is really helpful and might actually be really useful as we, like, going forward for artists to adopt, if we ever need to. But just having that, there's a few things I have to do in my studio so that I could deal with traceability, right? And so we think about this in food, we think about it in drugs all the time, but with tattoo ink, um, like you said, it's not the first thing on people's radar. I feel like that's probably the thing that needs to change.
Well, yeah, I mean, even if you look at it from a basic level of like, does a bottle have a lot number and an expiration date? That's a basic thing that every product should have on it. But I'm sure you can go out in the marketplace and find things that don't have lot numbers on them.
Yeah, my state, they require me to have ink on my shelf with a lot number.
Yeah, I know, like, well, I mean, anybody that's manufacturing products, I mean, that's like a basic thing. I mean, you should be at least doing that on the most basic level. But beyond that, I don't think a lot of manufacturers really understand the purpose of a lot number. You know what I mean? And the entire purpose of a lot number is to be able to control a recall if you have to have a recall, right? It's like somebody reports an adverse reaction to lot number 1, 2, 3. They
Mhm.
come to you and they report that. You have to be able to have full traceability of lot number 1, 2, 3. You have to know every person that it's gone out the door to. And you have to be able to trace that product everywhere it's been, and also all the raw ingredients that went into making that product. That all has to be documented and tracked through that lot number, you know? So like, but I'm with you. I would question how rigid that process is, not just in the tattoo industry, but just in general, you know, because even outside the tattoo, I mean, hell, you go to a farmer's market and you see all kinds of artisans selling soaps and like lotions, and a lot of times these are, what's that?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, a lot of times those are products that people are just making in their houses. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, there's a person down the street from me that has, they make soap. They have a little shed built behind their house. Now, granted, it's a really nice, clean space. I've been down there. We go down there, we walk down there and buy bars of soap from them all the time.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? But you know, how educated is that person really on a manufacturing standpoint? And they're just a small batch manufacturer, you know, so I wouldn't expect them to be like super well versed, but maybe they are. I don't really know. I've never questioned those people on that regard. I'm just buying soap. I don't really care that much about soap. You know what I mean? I just want it to smell good and make my skin soft. You know what I mean? Like,
Who cares if there's poison in there? Just kidding. So there's something about farmers markets that's actually different than when you buy it from this grocery store.
what's that?
It's the same difference of if you sat and mixed your own ink and used it in that day, right? Let's forgo the storage. And if you sold it to somebody that was in a different building. So farmers markets, we're allowed to sell food to another person. They're never going to take that away from us. So as long as I'm selling directly to the consumer,
And
that's
not
what's
to a
happening.
supermarket.
There's no distributor in the middle. There's no middleman. So when it comes to food, they're never going to take, and this is food, you know, they're never going to take the right away from a watermelon grower to go bring it somewhere and sell it off the back of his truck, because that's straight to the consumer. Now you start having to jump through hoops when you're in food production when you're making a certain amount. It used to be 250,000. It might be a 500,000 now, but like when you're selling a certain amount, you have to be at a GAP standard, and there's a tier 1, tier 2 levels, meaning you have to have a certain oversight when you're selling to a lot of people. But you're right. You know, just the thing is, and what this states, just if you're going to observe that's a good rule, is or agree that that's a good rule, is some of the adulteration happens, or some of the issues happen in the manufacturing large amounts and storing and moving for the purchaser. So manufacturing itself brings in an element of well, you know, if you have a vat of something, bacteria might be able to grow faster, you know, or there's just more to consider when you have a lot
Right.
more. And
Right.
then, you know, you have to store a lot more and you have to move a lot more. So it's a little bit different than like, hey, this just popped out of my oven this morning, I'm going to give it to you, versus, hey, I got to keep this on a shelf for 2 weeks. And I'll just say part of it that's a really interesting observation, that, you know, you think they don't have any oversight. Well, how many adverse events happen, you know, on the lower level? I don't know. I will say there's one big difference between tattooing and food that I often talk to clients about, because we've got you know, there's in every city, there's somebody maybe at a grocery store selling out of the back of their truck, like, you know, some good home cooked food,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, I'd be more apt to do that than I would let someone tattoo me with a question mark. And the difference is, when you put it in this hole, it comes out another hole. It's literally in a tube the whole way. Again, I'm not a doctor, but that's what I've been told. But basically, when you put it in under your skin, you're going by all the defenses you have.
Yeah. Right.
When you implant something with a needle, you're jumping by all the immune that we would normally have if you put it in a hole.
So you're saying we should eat our tattoo ink and see what happens?
Nice. I think you said that. This
I
is
was just reading between the lines.
Well, you know, so I mean, would it be better for you? I don't know if that's what I'm saying.
No.
Um,
Disclaimer, please don't eat
but
tattoo ink.
yeah, food, that's kind of the thing with food. I think when it comes to tattoo ink, it is part of our craft. The definition of our craft means to make the ink, put it in the skin. It puts the lotion on the skin.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. It has this, we can do it all if we want, but how often do we make the ink and use it in that session and never put it in a bottle on the shelf when we make it in our shop? Very
Well,
rarely. We have to store it. We have to, and in that liquid state is when if things haven't been considered, that's where some micro can come in. Now, remember, the biggest thing that FDA was like, this is something we need to care about, was the micro they found.
well, that seems to be what their primary focus is,
Yeah.
microorganisms, right?
And at a certain amount, right? Because there needs to be a certain parts per million. It's not any micro. Because, there's two types. There's ink that's sterile and there's ink that's not sterile.
Right.
In organic things, when they're sterilized, can oxidize and can change. So sterilizing something organic isn't always a good idea. We don't have sterile food for a reason, you know. So,
Well,
go ahead.
well, that's a tricky one for me too, because like I get the focus on that in the manufacturing process, right? I understand that. But what happens after that? So really to me, anything that has water in it is very susceptible to microbials, right? Like it can grow bacteria. Water
Yeah.
grows bacteria, like it just does. If you put water in a cup and sit it on your windowsill for 2 weeks and then you go test it for bacterial growth, it's going to have bacterial growth in it, 100% guaranteed, right?
Right. Right.
So I get it. It's easy to control in the manufacturing process if you're doing things right. And if you're sterilizing, it's easy for me to put a bottle of sterile ink in your hand today,
Right.
right? I can say, Amy, here's a bottle of sterile ink. We just
Mhm.
manufactured it. Here's all the documentation. Here's the sterilization certificates. It's 100% green. All the boxes are checked.
Right.
The problem happens after it gets in your hand, right? Because where does that ink go? How does it get stored? Does it go in your car? Do you take it and transport it from point A to point B? Does it maybe sit in your car for a couple of days in the heat? Does it go on an airplane up into the elevation because you're traveling from one state to another state? As soon as you open that bottle, it's not sterile anymore. You've exposed it to the air and the elements. As soon as you crack a needle out of a blister pack, it's not sterile anymore.
Right.
It's as soon as it hits the air, it's no longer sterile. It's contaminated.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's got bacteria right away. It's not like, oh, bacteria just goes, gotcha, you know.
Right.
But over time, you go into shops all the time. You can probably find bottles of ink that have been on the shelf for a year.
Mhm.
What happens if you test that bottle of ink after it's been on the shelf for a year? You know what I mean? How do
I
you
think that,
how do you qualify that product's safe from the point of entry to the point of putting it in your client's skin? You know what I mean? Like, and the only reason why I'm saying that is not because, but it's to say, like what you said, how much of a concern is it really? How deep is the scrutiny go in regards to that? You know what I mean? When does the liability not become a liability? And when does it become not the manufacturer's responsibility?
well, so I got two parts I want to talk about with that. One is, I think that everything that happens after I open the ink bottle is in the NEHA camp. And NEHA, National Environmental Health Association, they're dealing with the process. So let's talk about that first. So I think that you're right. I could contaminate that bottle. I could open it up and spit in it and put it back on my shelf. I would never do that, but I could, and I could cause a problem. Well, all of that would be on me. But up until that point of opening it, what's in the bottle should be transparent to me. I should have
Right.
everything disclosed to me. So I think that's where the manufacturer stops. But I have one more. So I want to sit there for a second. So there's one thing on ink bottles that, you know, often says do a test patch.
Patch
We
test.
talked about this in the panel
Yeah, yeah.
during, I think this is whose responsibility is that? You're a manufacturer, so I would toss that back to you. That's why I was tossing that out we were talking about that in the panel. I don't think that this is something that needs to be a black or white or like anything that's polarizing. I think it's something that we can hopefully discuss and consider what's really going on there and why is that on the label, and do I need to do that as an artist, or is that something that was done to a certain extent already? And I would think that some of that was already done by the manufacturer. I think you telling me that it is sterile when it comes into my hands tells me you've done your due diligence.
Right.
You telling me that it has, I mean, ultimately that's one of the factors, but it's probably the last factor I'd consider. I care what's in there to begin with. So is there metals? What's in that ink? And are you being transparent with that? Can I somehow substantiate that? Maybe not like every single bottle, but can I substantiate at least once with that manufacturer, and then maybe at an annual or at a certain incremental, depending on how much ink I go through. Now, I think it's a cool idea to possibly do what I don't know if this is what you're suggesting, but as a user of that product, should I do a third party audit on it and just like test it once when I start using that manufacturer? Say, you know, is that my responsibility to go through all that testing to prove what is in it? You know, right. So, but you know, that's where I think your question can lead is like, what in there can I get a substantiation from the manufacturer that actually says, buy this, it's a good product. And when you do all that work and I can ask you and you answer, I'm going to buy your product. I actually think this is part of industry. Some companies don't want to go there and don't want to like make sure, and they don't want to provide. And I think that they might not rise to the top as quickly as the other ones would.
Yeah, they won't.
And I think that that's actually what sets you apart. Like I was saying, some of this stuff sets me apart as an artist to say, hey, I'm going to give you ink that I know what's in it. I care about that it's clean. Here's my license. And now here's the cool piece of art. And for you as a manufacturer, I can imagine you're going to have a list of things too that you're like, this sets me apart. And that could be one of them. Although MoCRA has a minimum standard of you have to have an allergen on a label, you have to have a label, you have to be able to trace it back. Well, so we're talking about responsible persons, right? That's really your question. In the presentation that we did, Casey did part of it. He was talking from that consultant or from the point of view of like, what's someone gonna run into when they meet that inspection or that regulator, and how can I set them up for success? Well, he was talking about 3 different types of agreements, quality, practical, and supplier agreements. So some of these things, supplier agreements and quality agreements would look like discussing this stuff with a manufacturer. And then this is the conversation you'd have. What have you done? What can you provide for me? And then the end of it, the equation is, now what do I have to do?
Right.
And if I have to do all that stuff to prove that ink's, it's not my business. I don't have that capability to do all that testing. And I probably would go look somewhere else. And that's kind of what has happened. There used to be a company, I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but they're from Australia, Dermaglow, and they did a ton of testing, and they called it microdispersed. So they could tell you that per, a drop of ink, they were actually getting it in a form that you knew the dispersion and all that. Well, I love that company just because they did so much, research. They aren't around anymore. And some of that research is cumbersome for the manufacturers. So, I guess, if we get a clean ink and I mark that I got it on my shelf, and then there's I'm going to take your question to the end. What if there's an adverse event and we don't know who it came from? Is that kind of where you might be going with that question? Like which part is the manufacturer's keeping it clean and which part is my keeping it clean, and how do we tell the difference later?
Well, no, I was just kind of curious to know what your opinion on it was, because from my opinion, my standpoint is that as a manufacturer, I'm 100% with you. I feel like, and I feel like there, just for the record, I feel like there are definitely a few brands out there that are really kind of setting the standard for what, and I'm only talking about ink manufacturers right now.
Okay.
There are a few ink manufacturers in the tattoo space that are truly investing the time, resources, energy into total transparency around their products. Total, total, like this is the way we should be doing things. And I don't know if you just saw, but like Eternal just put out a video that just got released like yesterday. It's called like Eternal Forever or something like that. But it's only like a 27-minute video, but it's basically here's the lineage of Eternal Ink, and it really takes people behind the scenes and shows, this is where Tramp started making ink when he was a tattoo artist, and this is why he got passionate about really raising the bar, and why is Eternal one of the top brands in the industry today, and this is why, and here's everything that we do, and this is why we do this, and I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of that from manufacturers as we go forward.
Right.
Electrum, we're overhauling our whole entire website right now for total transparency. This isn't the way that we've always operated in the past because
Right.
our industry's always been a very close knit, closed door industry. Like it's that gatekeeping thing, right? Like we just don't open the doors and show you what's going on behind the scenes from the tattoo artist all the way to the tattoo manufacturers. It's the same methodology and mentality, right? Like we keep our secrets safe and we keep them close to the chest. We don't want to talk about, we don't want to talk with Eternal about what Electrum does. We don't want to talk, Eternal doesn't want to talk to Intends. We never had this open
Mhm.
dialogue and communication between manufacturers because we've always been competitors with one another and we're always trying to make sure that we're keeping our secrets safe. It's like the Coke and Pepsi methodology, right?
Mhm.
You think it's the same product, but you can taste them both and you know they're not the same product. But what are they doing different? Neither one of them know what the other one's doing. So it's like, but as manufacturers in the space, our mentality's changing now, right? We're recognizing the need to put this out to our artists that are using our products. Like you should be able to come to our website because you're talking about patch testing, right? Well, patch testing all has to do with allergens, and there's no way for a manufacturer to know whether your client's going to be allergic to our pigment or not, right? I mean, people are allergic to weird things. Some people are allergic to grass. They can't walk in the grass with bare feet because they'll have allergic
Mhm.
reactions to grass or whatever. So think
Right.
about in the fall and all the hay fever and stuff that people suffer from because of allergies. So you have to put those disclaimers, and I think you see those disclaimers on lots of products, not just inks or things like that, but really any product that touches the skin. I think there's probably some disclaimer that says do a patch test to make sure you don't have an allergic reaction to this product before you go full ham and put this all over your body. You know what I mean? It's better if you just have a little small reaction here than your whole body reacts to it and really causes you a problem. So, but the point is that as manufacturers, and it just starts with the ink manufacturers, we have to put total transparency out there so you as an artist can come to our website and say, oh, let me see what's in these ingredients. Oh, let me understand how I should store this ink so that I make sure that it stays safe for my clients. All that stuff needs to be out there. Hell, we get artists all the time come and ask us for sterilization certificates for our needles. Not every artist, but some
Mhm.
artists do. They're like, hey, my board of health requires me to have these sterilization certificates on hand. Can you? And we have them all. We don't
Mhm.
publish them, but if you come and ask for them, they're there.
Mhm. Mhm.
But as an ink manufacturer, we need to start publishing that stuff. You need just like your SDS. If you go on the website and you go to, Dragon's Blood, you right on that page. Here's the SDS. You can download the SDS, and we try to put as much. That's a 16-page document. It's loaded with information. But as an artist, are you going to take the time to read all that if you don't have to? Well, most people revert to an SDS only in the event that they have an issue, right?
I
Then
mean,
they go
how do you
revert to
deal
the
with it
SDS.
afterwards?
What's
I mean,
that?
how do you deal with it afterwards? Oh, I just did like a huge cherry blossom with a ton of pink, and now all the pink is bad. Oops. I mean, you only
Right,
do that once.
right.
So as an artist, like, yeah, you only do that once. You're going to change it up next time. You know what I mean? You're going to say, how do I not do that? Um, and what you're doing, and I do think you're doing an amazing job, specifically Electrum, is, you know, jumping up to a higher level of quality and safety. And so I see that, as our industry is maturing, is necessary, but it's future proofing, because what we don't want is what you said kind of originally was, that something would happen that we couldn't continue, tattooing somehow would get blackballed or blacklisted, or, you can't make it or what have you. But I really don't I see that as more of a fear than a reality. Of course, it's a good concern, and we should be kind of bolstered by something. We don't want that to happen, because it could if we don't involve and we don't jump up to what you're doing, that being safety standards. But if you, I don't know, just consider what role we all play in this. I think that ink manufacturers do play that role. That I'm responsible for this part, and I'm gonna do what I have to do. Now, if they jump up and do those things, register. MoCRA requires a few things. They can come up with whatever personal safety substantiation they can. So those things that you're talking about that would be different between Coke and Pepsi, or different between your ink and somebody else's red ink. Let's just say fire engine ink, red ink, the same cherry red, but two different companies making it. Well, you can see the ingredient. You don't know how much is in there. You will never know a trade secret from an ingredient, listing, except for the components. And so I think that concern of like being all working together and somehow losing the thing that makes my product better than all the rest is on the chopping block. I don't think that it's a risk. I don't think it has to be a risk, as long as that manufacturer comes to the table with just the information that keeps it safe. I could teach someone how to keep my tattoo studio safe, but never really teach them how to do the style and the work that I do.
Right.
That's a different part of the apprenticeship.
Right.
Or even how to create their own style.
Right.
So I do think that that's out there. It's probably a concern for manufacturers, but I don't know that. I mean, you could speak to it, but I don't know that it's actually has to be an element of it, that you would share trade secrets. But I do think that if we want to go forward and actual, future proof the scene, it looks like what you're talking about. It looks like this long-term plan to try to get a consensus view of what those minimal standards are. But remember that, when you're bringing everybody to the table, it's really, you got to make standards that'll work for someone who's the least likely to follow standards. So they have to be work
Right.
for everybody.
Right.
Or so minimal what we have to do, so that when we give something to an artist, that they can actually make sure that it's not going to cause issue for their client. And the issue, that's something that I addressed in our presentation a little bit, because I think that that's kind of what compels people to care, is like, is there any issue with this? And I don't know if you've ever seen someone 10 years later, their tattoo starts kind of looking like an open wound again, and doing
Mm-hmm.
things on the surface that it wasn't a tattoo I put in, but I have seen enough of them in real life to know that there is people that, not in the first month or probably the first year, come back with something adverse, event. And it could be their own personal allergy, but I'm wondering what clinical trials have been done that have proven doing a patch test in this specific method, because I don't even know what the method is, that manufacturer would require. Maybe spelling it out a little bit more would be helpful, or like you said, publicizing the clinical studies that have been done, so I know, well, pretty much everything's been done except for on this specific person who might just be hyperallergic, have a lot of allergies. And when I see the part that I can help in that situation is doing an awesome consent.
Mm-hmm.
I
Right.
ask them if they have allergies. I ask them if they've ever had tattooing. I've asked them, and usually when you're at a certain age, you're 18 or you've gone through life, you've run into the things that you would be allergic to when it comes to most colors.
Sometimes.
So you're right, but there's some things that go in inks that you might not have run into.
Mhm.
You're right, sometimes. So
Sometimes, like I've heard of like women getting pregnant, right? Like a woman will get pregnant and have a kid,
yeah.
and then their whole body changes.
Huh. Okay.
Like
That's good. That's
I've
a good example. Yeah.
well, I've had friends, you know, like this has happened personally. Like so, I've had a friend that um she got pregnant or had kids, and then all of a sudden she's allergic to chicken. Weirdest freaking thing, right?
That's
I
super
was like,
weird.
what? Because we invited them over to our house one time, and she's like, "Do you guys have chickens anywhere near you? Because we live in the country." And I was like, "Yeah, my neighbors down, you know, like a mile down the road, they have chickens." And she's like, "I don't know if I can come over." I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "I can't be around chickens. I'm highly allergic to chickens. Like if I'm anywhere around them, I'll have serious like breakout. My body freaks out." I'm like, "What?"
Interesting.
She's like, "Yeah, it happened after I had kids." I was like, "That's weird," but it happens.
Yeah.
I You hear about that kind of stuff all the time. You know, even people as they age, their body changes and their chemical composition and their body changes, and sometimes they form weird allergies to things that's never been a problem the whole rest of their life. You know,
Hmm.
so it's things that can change over time. And I'm not a scientist or a smart enough person to understand the biology or the science behind all that, but it does happen. But I think you're right though, from a manufacturing standpoint. I don't think our objective is to, because what makes a product unique, right? Like you talk about like the fire engine red. It looks like the same red, but maybe it doesn't perform quite the same. And that all has to do with like, where's that manufacturer sourcing their ingredients from? You know, are they paying $1 for the raw ingredient, or are they paying $5 for a higher level, cleaner ingredient? You know, that's the difference in Coke and Pepsi, right? That on the surface, they look kind of the same. They taste kind of the same, but there's things inside the manufacturing and the ingredients that set them apart. You know, even the percentages of what's in there. You know what I mean? Like that's the stuff that the manufacturers are never going to want to share with one another, and in my mind, should never be required to share with
Right.
one another, right?
Right.
Because that's the secret sauce. That's the recipe to grandma's sweet potatoes. You know what I mean? Like you just,
Yeah.
you know, it's just those trade secrets that you don't give out. But I think
But
as
you're right.
far as what's that?
I was going to say you're right. If the manufacturers start stepping up and on the front end, you know, be proud about what they're doing and create and step up to what MoCRA is asking them to do, I feel like in that way it's not going to be dictated to them. So
You
I
know,
agree with you that that's part of the future proofing. I mean, giving us what we need, what I would need from a manufacturer would be, um, we've talked about a little bit about the ingredients. What you just said was interesting. And I do know it to be true, but I'm glad you said it because you know more about it from manufacturing point of view. But like if I was making that ink in my own, let's just say I was making ink in my own studio for myself, and I bought that powdered red and all the other components. Um, and I got a choice between this lower quality and this higher quality. I know that I've been disconnected from my ink because I choose to buy from a place that's better at making it than I am. You know, that's why I buy my needles. They are better at soldering than me. Machines are better at soldering than I am. I had to admit that at
right,
some
right.
point. And plus, they could make them, you know, efficiently and package efficiently, and you know, all of that. I think is actually advantageous to us, the manufacturing. So it's actually hugely advantageous to have a manufacturer of ink. But the side of it that you just mentioned is like what specific source, you know, raw materials are being chosen. And I think some of that can be found when I ask the manufacturer, you know, if they've tested those sources to confirm, and if they have, great, or been given tests. And ultimately, you know, substantiating that is kind of the part that we're talking about. Like, so you can say it all day long that this is what's in your product. I noticed your product changed a while ago, specifically the Stencil stuff, and you made that label Wamidine awesome and added things to it. And just, I mean, it's just stencil stuff. I mean, it's not ink.
Right,
Not trying to
right,
minimize how cool your Stencil stuff is.
right.
Love it. But, you know, I noticed that you stepped it up and actually I wanted yours more than the rest because of that. Because I
Right.
wanted it on my shelf so I could show, I mean, there's so many reasons, right? So it has an expiration date on it. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of stencil stuff doesn't do that. You know, a lot of these side products don't do that. And I say all that to just say, like, I think the manufacturers are key and needed, but that substantiating the stuff they know is what I need to do my job. And then at the end of the day, let's just say, um, you know, this company's ink got recalled and I had that ink on my shelf. Well, it's a preventative thing, like, oh shoot, pull that off the shelf. I'm so glad I wasn't, I mean, I'm happy I didn't use that ink before I found out that the whole batch had micro in it, you
Right.
know. But the only way that those kind of recalls are gonna happen, like the closed bottle recalls are either done internally or, you know, externally by force, you know, or the FDA, you know, picking things up. And so I
Right.
think I had and I'm happy to share a bunch of links with you afterwards if you want to put join them to what we've been talking about. But there was a couple of slides out of my presentation that talked about the adverse events. So I wasn't always convinced that it mattered enough. Like, really, is it that big of a deal? You know, and the more I got educated on it, the more I realized that, yeah, there's a lot of manufacturers putting things in inks that they're not being transparent about that are causing issue later. Micro is probably one of those things as well that they've been finding rampant amounts of. And again, let's just be clear for the listeners is, you know, a certain amount of micro per, you know, ppm
Parts
we're
per
talking
million.
about. Yeah, we're not talking about that it has micro
Right.
at all. We're talking about that the load of it is enough that could affect the client. Because like what you're saying is true. When we pull it out of that sterile package, now we're in a clean environment. In some, you know, in a respiratory, you know, clinic, they have forced air pressure. In a lab, you have forced air pressure. And part of that is so the air is always moving and there's always clean air that's coming from a filter through. In my studio, I do have some HEPA filtering happening. I do try to clean the space in a certain amount of time with those filters. But the truth is there's a little, you know, cloud of mist of, you know, this tattoo ink and blood in the air, you know? So I'll just say that when I'm doing my process, I keep it clean, you know, to the extent I can. And we end up, this is a procedure that's done just on the surface of the skin. So we're not like, it's not as invasive as a piercing where we're implanting a foreign thing that's staying and it's going in the skin and coming out the other side. We're just staying on the surface. So for some of those reasons, just that clean environment is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Know? Just like a dentist has kind of a clean environment. It doesn't have to have an aseptic techniques or sterile environment. But I do think that the ink, you know, up to me using it, it's important that I get it straight from the manufacturer because I don't even want it to sit on a shelf somewhere.
Right.
But it is important for me to get that information from, you know, and up until MoCRA, I was using REACH compliant because they had a standard. They're like, hey, we'll prove stuff to you. We've at least done something.
Uh, uh,
We feel proud about that we've gone through all this stuff. Now we could probably do a whole another couple hours on just things that Reach has done that we might not want to reproduce here in America because there was a lot of research and some of it was applied that wasn't perfectly applied, and some things were banned that may or may not need to be banned, and there's a lot we could talk about, but I
well,
guess
I do want to talk about it.
okay.
I do. Because I feel like it's important because there was one thing that you said earlier in our conversation where you were like, well, we don't want them to come in and make these rules for us because then we're going to have to live with those rules. And I feel like if we're talking about reach and what's gone on in Europe, that's already kind of happened, right? Like it already has. I mean, they've already banned specific pigments. It's really affected the quality of the product over there. I mean, if you talk to artists over there, and it's interesting to hear you say that you were using Reach compliant inks because I'm curious to know how you felt they performed up against the inks that you were used to using, you know, because I haven't necessarily heard a lot of great things about Reach compliant inks, you know. So
Have you
I,
used them?
I haven't personally used them other than the ones that we've developed ourselves with our ink company.
Okay.
But I haven't really thoroughly tested any other brands of REACH compliant inks. No, I've just solicited feedback from other artists that have used them.
Okay. Um, so your question was, do I like them? Yes. I've been using REACH compliant inks. Well, see, REACH has gone through a process of where they initially started, oh, this is something we should pay attention to. There's a lot of research. Like I was saying, there's been many 10-year-long studies on this stuff. I say many, there's been enough that I can't count them all. But ultimately, what they found was that there was reason to be concerned that what was in the bottle was actually listed on the bottle, because that was a big neglect that was happening, that they were finding out the more they tested it.
Mhm.
And that's where I'd kind of start why I cared about using Europe grade standard ink, is because they said, hey, we care. And there were some companies that were like, we care too. And we'll give you we'll like to prove to you what we've gone through and give you a C of A of something that we've tested after we've made it. And we've gone through like double checking things. So I can't tell you the exact year that I would say I 100%, have been using it, but I bet it's over 10 years, easily over 10 years. So, but again, like the EU standard that we know of now is really just within it's a shorter term than that. There was like this progression from 2003 on, where it was like a non-enforced standard, and then like basically got the full standard going now, where they're actually going in and now checking on it. So I know there is some discussion on the inks being subpar because they're using components. Let's just talk about one specific. They were using greens and blues, and then
Mhm.
they started realizing that some of the cobalt, the heavy metal in them, was not okay, and so they started playing around with new components. Now, before they even did that, they tested these chemicals. So ECHA is what governs Europe, but it's under the chemical safety. That's what ours is under, cosmetics. But so they're looking at it like, are these safe chemicals? And I know that they have been replaced by newer ones, and some people talk about those newer ones not being tested as long.
Right.
Now, some of the things they put those original chemicals or components through was a lot of different, like gamma, these radiation tests to see what would happen when they're exposed to, I think, light.
The high temperatures.
Yeah, high temp, to see what would
Mhm.
happen. And some of those things don't really happen in everyday life.
Right.
But when they exposed them to it, they were like, "Ooh, I don't like what happens when it's exposed to it." And I'm just crunching this down to like a layman's level, and just please, I'm telling you as much as I can tell you. We can do more research and point at people that actually know the research later. But ultimately, that's what was happening, is they like, this thing, oh, we found out this one thing we did do, it made it unsafe. Well, I've heard from manufacturers and chemists that that's not making it unsafe. And then when the new ink that they put in there, the blue or the greens that they were substituting, I should say, blue or green components, there's a lot of people are concerned that these are inks that we haven't used before. And, I'm not, mhm, I'm not sure that we've always been using the same greens and blues. What do you think, Rob? Do you think we've been using the exact same chemicals for the last 50 years?
I have no idea. Probably not.
And with modern, manufacturing, it's changed throughout that whole time.
But again, that goes back to the conversation that we were just having about raw ingredient sourcing. You know what I mean?
Right.
You
So
can you can get an ingredient that's a top shelf product, or you can get an ingredient that's supposed to be the same thing. If you go test it, it has a bunch of impurities in it. You know what I mean?
that's right. And so one thing I noticed is I used to get ink. Um, and it said 99.99% organic. I totally am one of those people that do look up to people about that have had 10 plus years experience and ask them. I mean, that has been the way, since I started. I think I originally got a machine based, I got referred, I'll tell you this fun story because it is a fun story, but like I met Clean Rock One at a convention in Wisconsin in, I don't know, 2000-ish. And we went down to his shop. One of my buddies was getting tattooed by him, and he had a Sessa machine, which is it's a solid brass cast machine that he makes custom for each person. And so I got a referral for one of those machines from Seth, and I'll give props to Seth. Like I think 3 years later, I was like, man, my capacitor, came disconnected from my coil. So I was all trying to figure that out. And in doing so, I was making it worse. And I called Seth. He's like, send it to me. I was like, but it's the machine I love. And I literally used that machine from 2001 until I, got a newer pen machine. And that was like 20 years almost. But, I asked Guy Atchison's someone that I really look up to when it comes to art. And I kind of followed him a little bit on when he would change inks. But I noticed all these guys I'm asking, they don't use the same ink every 5 or 10 years, we're repositioning to the ink that we want to use. And I don't think it's because those inks have stayed the same. I think it's because they, as manufacturers, kind of change things and we notice those things and we adjust. So that's my first answer to like, is this new ink or what? Reach inks, I can tell you my touch-ups have gone down to almost nothing annually. Like I think I only had, like I can count them all on one hand the last 5 or 10 years consecutively. Like 10 years it's like I don't have a lot of touch-ups. I'm going for the ink that stays where I put it. And when I use when I use the inks that I love, the consistency, and they also have raw materials that are not going to be something the skin's going to want to push out, that have like, heavy metals or plastics or something other than organic pigments and things the skin can live with. I've noticed my touch-ups are, basically it's usually just something where someone picked a scab early, or, it's usually an aftercare issue.
Right.
So and honestly, I'll ask you this because I've been asked this question a little bit. You see European tattoos, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've seen Russian tattoos, right?
Yes.
How bad are they?
You
Or
mean
are
bad as in
they
terms
amazing?
of good?
Well, yeah, do you ever see any good European tattoos? Of course you do, right?
All the time.
Amazing,
Yeah.
even. Now, one thing I heard someone say, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure you're using the term bad as in like, that's fucking
Oh,
badass. You know what I mean? Like, and not like
bad
trash
with a
bad.
double D.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Cat with a PH. No, sorry, let me say that again. Yeah. How many do you see amazing tattoos that blow your mind visually
Yeah.
from?
All the time.
Yeah. They're
Yeah.
probably using European grade. They probably are. Maybe they aren't, but they probably are because most of them are sponsored.
I'll plead the fifth on that one.
Yeah. Well, that's the truth too. We don't have to go there, but it's the truth that, let's just talk about sponsored artists that do brag and talk proudly about the ink that they use that is reach standard. There's a lot of people that I look up to in Europe. And so, yeah, I think the proof is in that I can see work that is amazing that's being done with reach standard inks. Now, I look forward to MoCRA being part of the manufacturing process, like when manufacturers embrace MoCRA, and I can pretty much have safety substantiation in my drawer for my purposes, from a American ink supplier. I'm looking forward to that because I actually think some of these colors that may not, I'll say be accessible in Europe, may actually be accessible in America. Those
Yeah.
old yellows and those old oranges that people remember that didn't fade, I actually think that I have hope that those can be substantiated and that we can get some of those back. I actually think it's gonna be a liberty for us as for you as manufacturers or for us as ink buyers, I think it's going to actually allow for us to use everything that Europe did to our benefit and scrap the stuff that we don't love or that we don't think is helpful, and actually pick up all the things that we can now prove. And so I think it's to our, I'm excited that people want to lead or be part of, be involved in that future proofing of the industry, and I learned a lot in AFTO. I just showed up and started listening, but I learned a lot about what AFTO does in the layer that they fit in. And what I understand, they're a nonprofit, right? But they've always been the kind of connection from the industry to regulation. And ultimately the goal is public health. Like our goal
Right.
is to just get in people's business. And a lot of people, we can talk about some things in government are like that, but the reason I was involved in my local government, my state government, and I'm involved in this is not because I'm trying to promote government. In fact, I personally think that having the smallest part system, like our city municipal, having the most say is democracy, is the way that we can make a difference, because it affects the local community. So it should have the biggest voice. And how you have it happening in your state, where the health department, that's county, is getting the most say, but it's not really doing its due diligence. I still feel like that's worth having, because I care most about it being bottom up heavy, like meaning the local ordinances trump, the bigger ordinances, because I feel like they should adopt the things that are observed at state and federal level as well, or at least consider them. So there's a trickle down from the feds, from a public, but then there's a trickle up on how it's actually enforced and implemented, and how we can actually in some way get a finger on the pulse of what's happening in our every community. So it's not really that it can solve everything at the federal level, but if what we're talking about, we're future proofing. And that's something I learned from AFTO. Actually, Ken Stevenson, that did the presentation with me, that's something that he kind of has used that term, future proofing, and saying that the industry can really write its own future.
Right.
Has been what's inspired me to kind of have a finger, be part of AFTO. And I think we have to have that representation from who's using it, as well. So I think AFTO, their role would be to help the industry, put all that stuff that we know in a place that FDA can read it, like literally fill up their file drawer before they get to, and then they open their drawer and they're like, wow, look at all this good stuff that we can use that's already written for regulation. These guys have done their work, they've gotten together, and now we don't have to do anything. In fact, that's helpful for them. So I know that AFTO is kind of that middleman part of that process, where, yeah, back in the 1890s, when milk was being adulterated to the point where they were putting talc in it, and they found out some milk wasn't even, it had zero milk in it, and a baby died, that's when they started caring. Because, a serious adverse event is mandatory to report. And so a serious adverse event would be like, serious, lifelong, impactful injury, not a temporary thing, or death. But,
Right.
how does that even get connected? That has to have the tattoo artist, the practitioner, involved, because there's no way to be connected with any adverse event unless we keep some kind of a finger on the pulse of what's happening with my client, and follow up with them afterwards, or that they know they can follow up afterwards. So let's just say somebody had an adverse event and they went to their doctor. Well, their doctor would say, yep, that's an adverse event, probably came from your tattoo. We could, call up the tattoo artist, get that ink from them. I could call the company. They might still have some of that batch on their shelf. They might be able to test it and say, you know what, we just found it, it's not our ink. So there's a couple ways that traceability can actually be really helpful to understand what happened,
Right.
and I think the doctor could have a say in that too, as far as like, what are they dealing with? Some toxicity, I'm kind of skeptical that I'm in line with a lot of the old school tattoo artists saying we've been doing this for a long time. And we don't see like people dropping like flies.
Right.
So I'm there. But we have been doing this a long time, and we know that things have changed in manufacturing. And in understanding that and having the ability to test, we can actually, since it's grown so much, you know, in the last 20 years, to where literally a third of Americans have tattoos and are getting a lot of their body tattooed, that it's worth putting the information out there to say, hey, this, you know, this is what you're putting in you. Now you have a informed consent to be an adult and make that decision. But to not give them that information, to me, is that's where I see the discrepancy. That's where I see this gross neglect. I don't
Right.
understand. I was going to say I don't understand why someone as a collector wouldn't care about that. But I think part of it has to do with the person who's doing the tattoo. You know, people can be really convincing, like, hey, let's just do this. It doesn't matter that it's in an unclean environment or that you don't know anything about it. And look at this cool thing I did. It's, you know, that person that's I'm the only check in between your awesome ink that comes off the shelf and them, you know, having that piece. So I think somewhere in there, it's all of us together doing this process, because if we kind of all hold hands on that one, I think that it will be successful for public health. And then it will kind of prove that this area, we're not seeing those adverse events. But over here in this other area where it's Amazon ink or inks that, you know, we're seeing a lot of these adverse events. Right now, it's hard to peg between the two of them. But let's just go there for a second. Unprofessional ink versus professional ink. I mean, they are testing professional pro grade ink, and they are finding the problems with transparency on the ingredients,
Right.
finding micro, and, you know, not just that they didn't put something on the label, but that something's on the label that isn't in there. You know, there's like both directions of like, so if I don't know that my manufacturer is going to be straight with me on that, that's why I've chosen Reach. I've had to make that choice because it's either one or the other. It's either I know something and I choose my inks wisely and I figure that out, or I choose the other. And I want to get, like, for a second, I'm not going to call myself a technical expert on this, but there are some people who know a lot about particle size. Have you
Yeah.
have you talked much to anybody about particle size and what that means for ink longevity and migration and transient?
It doesn't come up a lot in conversations in the day-to-day stuff. You know what I mean? Not at all. So,
So so particle size is important in the pigment because if it's too small, it doesn't even stay in the cell.
right.
So in REACH compliant inks that they're having poor results with, I talked with a friend in the UK, and him and I were kind of going back and forth, and then I heard somebody talking about particle size and Euro inks, and I'm kind of thinking that some of these new changes, maybe there's some things I need to be considering as well. Oh, I get this new component, but what is the particle size? I mean, I don't know. There's lots of things that manufacturers have to consider in this, and it has to be for my use. You know, it can't just be a clean thing. It actually has to serve the purpose of my use. So there's kind
Yeah.
of two things going on there. And no, I haven't had I haven't had any problem with my Reach grade inks. I love them. I have a hard time finding a turquoise.
Well, so it's inter it's interesting, Amy, because like, um, I was on the World Conference of Tattoo Pigments this year. I attended that, and I was listening to all the discussions in that one. And I can never remember the name of the guy's company. There's an ink brand over there, and the guy that owns it is a tattoo artist. It's like God, I don't even want to guess what the name of it is. I just can't remember. But um, he was talking about how it's really almost impossible to make reach comply. Well, inks that fall within the reach guidelines, right? Like it's a really impossible thing to do. Specifically when you're talking around parts per million and that kind of language, you know what I mean? So I think it's still a very much uphill battle for ink manufacturers to make, and this is what I'm talking about when I say I hear a lot of negative things around reach compliant inks. I think it's more pertinent to that kind of a discussion. You know what I mean? Like ever since they banned those two particular that blue and green, the blue and green pigments, I think the ink manufacturers have really struggled to find, which is probably goes back to why you're having such a hard time trying to find a turquoise, because that's directly affected by those pigment bans, right? So like the positive thing about this though, and this is why I don't have REACH compliant inks yet. I do have REACH compliant inks. Let me rewind and say that I do have them. I don't have them for sale in Europe yet. And specifically because this is kind of an advantage that I've had with my ink company, because I just started manufacturing ink 3 years ago. So it's not like I'm Eternal or Intends or world famous where I've got, 20 years of European sales under my belt, and I'm highly reliant on that marketplace as a huge part of my business, right? Like those brands still have to have that product in those spaces to be able to maintain the level of business that they've been doing for the last 20 plus years, right? Can't just all of a sudden jerk that part of the business away from them. I mean, they'd lose half their sales overnight, right? It would have a drastic impact on their business in a negative way. I wasn't faced with that same challenge because I hadn't had ink. I wasn't selling ink in Europe yet. So when the REACH regulations came down for me, I was in a little bit more of a comfortable place, because I was like, internally, our discussions were like, hey, we don't have to rush a REACH compliant line of ink. We're not selling it there yet. We have the luxury of having the time to really develop these and test these for a couple of years. And we want to see how these react in the skin. We want to see how these tattoos heal. We want to really make sure that when we enter the European place with REACH compliant inks, that we are rock solid confident in the product that we're putting out there, and that the artists are going to really be happy with the inks that we're putting out there under the REACH regulations, right? So we're just now putting our stuff over into the CTL labs and trying to get our certifications to green light our sales over there. But the point of all that is that when we talk about evolution in manufacturing in the ink space, I think where we're headed, what you're going to see as an artist in the next, and I really don't have an indication of how soon it's going to happen, but let's just say somewhere in the span of the next 5 years. I predict that right now let's just say you have 50 different ink brands on the market. I don't know if that's the number, but let's just say that's the number. I predict that within the next 5 years, more than half of those ink brands are going to disappear. They're just not going to, they're not going to be able to comply because of financial constraints. Because to be honest with you, it costs millions of dollars to build a facility that's ISO certified, that is actually a clean laboratory that is conducive to good manufacturing processes to manufacture tattoo pigments. Eternal does it, Intends does it, we do it. There's a few brands out there that are doing it. I don't know if the rest of them are, because there's no real transparency in that, but you're starting to see that. You're going to see brands like Eternal and Electrum and Intends really start bringing that content to the artist space. You're going to start seeing that on social media. You're going to start seeing that in newsletters and publications, where the ones that are really at the top level of this, they're going to start putting that out. They're going to start pulling that curtain back, and they're going to say, hey, it's like going to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, right? Like, you got a golden ticket now. You can go in and you can see how Willy Wonka makes his Wonka bars. You know what I mean? Like, that's what you're going to start seeing from the top level manufacturers. The ones that are going to disappear are the ones that aren't going to be able to pull that curtain back, because they don't operate that way. So they're either going to disappear, or they're going to go to the top level manufacturers, and they're going to start having their products white labeled by those top level manufacturers. That's what I see happening in the next 5 years. You're going to probably have 4 to 5 ink manufacturers in the space making all of the ink in the space. Because I can tell you from the conversations that I have behind the scenes, that Sean Brown and I are working to try to get the manufacturers back together, right? Ever since CTS fell apart.
Yeah.
Sean and I have kind of, in the last couple of years, really come together, and we've said, hey man, let's pick this torch up. We got to get the manufacturers back to the table. We got to start having these conversations. We got to start deciding what how we want to present ourselves to the FDA and the regulators, and how we work with them to do exactly what you said, develop these protocols and safety standards that are going to be adopted and accepted by the regulatory people, right? And not just here, but in Europe, in Australia, in Canada. Our goal as manufacturers, particularly in the ink space, is to develop a universal pigment that is FDA approved. I mean, that's our ultimate goal long term, right? But that takes millions and millions of dollars and hours of research and a lot of brain power that goes well beyond what's harnessed in my headspace, or and even we have to look to people like Tramp and Mario Barth, who have been manufacturing inks for 50, 30 to 50 years. These guys are experts in this space, far more so than we are. You know what I mean? We're just babies in this arena. And I know enough, but I don't know what those guys know. I don't have the additional 20 years under my belt that they have in that manufacturing process. So it's a blessing to us that they're still willing to come to the table and have the conversations with us, and still, because they care. You know what I mean? They care about the same things you care about, the consumer safety and good products in the marketplace. So that's what's going to set the brands apart going forward, for sure. You're going to see a lot of that. And I think from the artist side, I think artists are just getting more educated and they're becoming more aware. The new generation of artists that are coming in are asking a lot more questions. They're much more passionate about clean things and like healthy things, and like, it's not, I always tell people this story all the time. Like, my grandfather was in World War II and got tattooed in World War II. And he had these big, nasty green tattoos on his arm. You couldn't tell what they were because they're 60 years old. You know what I mean? Like, they're sun faded. They're just blown out. They're just not great tattoos to begin with. But God knows what was in the pigment that went in his skin 60 years ago that he got on probably a dock in a Navy yard somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, next to some fishery, probably. It was not a clean environment. The product was probably not, I can almost assure you it wasn't a sterile product.
Sure.
The point is, he still had both his arms. His fingers worked. He wasn't dying from whatever was in his skin. You know what I mean? So the ink process has evolved a lot since that time period. And even when we were in the AFDO conference, we were pointing out in the presentations that cavemen had tattoos, and tattoos are traced back to the very, very beginning of humanity. You know what I mean? So like Egyptian mummies, they unwrap and have tattoos in them, So we know that tattooing's been a thing for a very long time. And we know that it's a fairly safe process. But you're right, it has to be something that's continually evolving. So I guess the point of all that is to say that from a consumer standpoint, as a tattoo artist, you're going to start seeing a lot more of that transparency, So I think
I look forward to it. I look forward to it. So what I usually do is I have a conversation with the manufacturer, like, hey, what's up? What do you feel comfortable giving me? I'm looking for this stuff that MoCRA does ask for, but just wondering where you're at, on it. And usually people love having that conversation with me, and they're like, oh, let me get you all the stuff I got. Once I have some of that safety substantiation, then like I start thinking I can have a relationship with this person. I'm thinking about the supply chain. I want to be able to use that ink and not wonder if I'm going to get that yellow ink next month, or if their company does everything right, then they're, like you said, there's going to be no concern that I'm going to have to find a different source.
right,
It's going to get an adverse event, or there's going to be some recall on the ink that I use.
right.
So all of those things, I have been able to get that from an American company literally in the last 6 months. It was funny. I had, because I'm open to companies. In fact, I'd rather use an American company. So there's a couple companies that I'm working with or asking for, MoCRA compliant information. And I think that I'm getting it from 2 companies now, but it's not like I've gotten all that I'd like to have. get like C of A's and double checks on substantiating everything. So, I feel like they have that, and it's just a new process for them to do it. And so it's actually a managerial decision because they don't want anybody really running away with their, trade secret kind of thing.
Right.
I usually have this conversation about why I want it. And, I might not be totally required to have all of it right now, but looking forward, I can see that it's something that would be good for me to have at least a safety plan, right? And then from there, what's my standard operating procedure on, like you said, just a couple things that I can apply real simply that I have to do every day is I get a bottle in the mail. What do I do with it? Put it in my car? Nope. The storage part of it, then the opening part of it, then keeping it part of it, and then the throwing away part of it. And so
Right.
having a checklist where things that come in my building and go out of my building, it allows for me to have some order to that. I think all of those things are good practices that if I do that right, I can be part of the new, if you will, MoCRA oversight, and can only serve the whole situation that way. But I think I kind of feel like it's two different discussions. The whole, it's been around forever and it not being harmful to people. And it's just nuanced a little bit, but I like having this conversation with you, Rob. I appreciate you having these like deep and kind of relevant, and open discussions, because I do think that it's part of the solution. It's part of going forward. It's not like this thing that's only going to happen once. I think this is part of how we roll, how we continue to kind of be effective or serve the situation. But, I hope that I can switch over and be able to get all American grade inks. I have hope. In fact, I've gotten the information I need on my turquoise, and I already have my American grade turquoise,
Mm-hmm.
So because that was the one that I was coming short. It's very specific. Turquoise is one of my favorite colors.
Right.
And I think I know that as a pigment mixer, I can mix things, but you know how things are. You can have the three primary colors, yellow, blue, and red, but you can't mix those colors to get a fuchsia or a magenta there's specific blue sources, so when I do oil painting, we have like Prussian blue and phthalo blue, and there's a few
Sure.
blue sources, a few red sources, and these are all real things that come out of the world somewhere. They're plants, or they're usually something that's sourced from the earth. And so all of that, I hope, and I've talked to enough chemists that actually are in the manufacturing scene that they're totally on board with you. They think that this is something they can get FDA approved inks. It's like you said, there is some hurdles, there are some challenges, and actually part of it could look like some of the stuff we're working on in MoCRA and in AFTO, and looking at MoCRA and what's really needed, because I think if we approach it correctly, we can, like I said, do the minimum amount that's needed so that we can get the client and the artist aware of pretty much transparency of what's in the ink. And that's, as long as we can do that, we can talk about how long tattoos have been done and but you can't really it's hard to say that your grandpa got a couple tattoos and make some kind of comparison to some other person that went somewhere else and got some other total different situation and had their whole body covered, so I think the amount of coverage is important, and we're seeing a lot of this blackout tattooing, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
like full body, going over it more than once. And this is where I see the studies over the last 25 years speaking to the amount of coverage. So one of the side effects that they have seen, which I'm not going to say all tattoo inks would produce this, I'm actually convinced that it isn't across the board. I don't think you can say tattoo inks and make any kind of declaration like a broad brush stroke with. So I do think that some inks could cause issue and some inks wouldn't cause issue. And I would still go back to that, or those components that your skin can live with.
Right.
They have found out that people have lymphatic issues. They inspect and they find a ton of ink in there. Now, my clients would come to me and be like, ooh, that doesn't sound good. And my response to them is, well, my intent is that it's not the inks that I use. So you see how I'm actually separating myself. Now I'm saying that knowing I don't know everything. I'm telling them as much as I can know. And in 20 years, it might look a little different. So I'm admitting that I might have to learn and keep staying educated and kind of, evolve with that, what we understand or what, information tests we have out there. But I kind of think that, I think the sky's the limit on being able to get this stuff approved for American grade. Now, what do we have to do? I think that's where we're at right now. Like, what has to be done right now? Do we have to do everything, or do we have to do just the beginning, the starting points that show that we're at least paying attention and trying to double check on all the ingredients that we're using? And I think that, the FDA getting it approved by FDA, that's an amazing goal. I do think it's achievable because I have talked to chemists and asked them like pointed questions on specific components. And I think we're in a place where it's achievable. I don't think there's anything that is happening in inks that's like, wow, we need to ban that one for sure. If anything, we need to ban the unlicensed or the things that are being sold to people that aren't professionals.
Right.
I think most of the issues are happening in a realm that's not even in a licensed, facility. Well, then we can talk about licensed facilities and think about, how many shops are actually saying, I know what's in my ink and I get my ink from the manufacturer. So I think it does come back to that, if we're talking about products, I mean, I think the industry, if they want to show up and have a seat at the table and have these hard discussions and try to get a consensus of what quality standards look like now, just like right now, and then, go forward, I think that's going to be helpful. But then as tattoo artists, talking to our clients about it, and it's just like pre-care and aftercare. Hey, do you know what's going on? Let me tell you. And then our clients know, and when they leave me, hopefully they go to the next shop. If they go to hopefully they keep coming back to me. But the thing is, people travel and move, and I want them to have enough in there up here when they leave with me that they can go make a good decision. So they might go find in their shop and be like, hey, do you have a license? Oh, do you have an inspection? Oh, wow. Great, great. Or no, thanks. And then then they ask about the ink, and then,
Right.
and hey, do you have an ink standard? I don't really think I could give you an answer I could tell you my answer, but what is that ink standard? Well, any standard will do. What is it? Do you have one? Same for the manufacturers. Do you have one? Do you do anything? So tell me what you do. You obviously are convinced of it, and if
Right.
you're doing something and you're not convinced of it, I think that's who MoCRA is going to be helping at least abide with a certain standard. And so I
Right.
actually think just like unlicensed tattooing, when I was working with the state and license, helping people be able to get within licensure was part of it. If someone was running a dirty shop and they got a hit on their inspection, well, here's the way to solve it. And they're like, great. And they solve it. And now they've jumped up a level, and actually that regulation has helped them. And that's the way I look at how regulation can help us. I don't think it's going to come down with a hammer. I think it's going to, it's going to be met with hopefully hey, the industry thinks this is the best standard. What do you think? And then letting someone make a change in that. So from an artist point of view, I think it's asking where I get my source, and then talking to my clients, and then anybody out there who is a client or thinks about being a client or has a friend that is a client, I think we can have that same discussion. Hey, so you're getting ink tomorrow. What's your standard in ink, or what's their standard in ink? That would be what I would hope for everyone, so that this discussion happens. And then it definitely will make it important to the manufacturer, because it's important to the consumer and it's important to the person that's using it.
Yeah.
The manufacturer will be like, man, because I just think the thing is, you made some good points, and you're such a positive person. I love that about you. About how a lot of people do care about things, and they do want to research. And I know you see the good in people there. I saw some things happen on TV within the last 20 years that actually made tattooing like a free-for-all, like
Right.
like,
Right.
there's other things you see,
Right.
It's like, hey, it's a party. We're rock stars.
Just the mainstream exposure, you mean?
Yeah, and seriously, nothing against the whole pirate thing, but we're pirates. We can do, basically don't tell us what to do. And I get that don't tell us what to do because I have pride in what I'm doing. But that I can do whatever I want for whatever reason I want, I don't agree with. I
Right.
think, I can do whatever I want because I have good reason for what I'm doing, and I can substantiate that, and it's actually documented. Is why I can do what I want to do. So, and I think we can. Our industry has a lot of strong personalities, and I think that's a good thing. Not so we clash, but so when we get together, we're a stronger unit to kind of
Right.
substantiate that that hey,
Right.
we are capable in this, and we can show up and do this together. And I just think if there's a lot of people out there looking to get ink, and you're right, they're not asked. If they would ask that question, I think that it could be on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. It would be a um, at least a good change or a good impact I could see.
Yeah, and I think to kind of emphasize something that you said in there in regards to just being able to work together. And one thing that I always want to make sure that I do on this podcast is really just make sure that I'm doing a service to the APT. I always want to make sure I'm shouting out the APT on this podcast because I'm still amazed by how many artists don't even know about the APT. You know what I mean? And what the APT is about, what they're doing. We talked about a little bit in the beginning in the contrast between the APP and the APT. Alliance of Professional Piercers and Alliance of Professional Tattooists. So, two trade organizations, one focused on piercing, one focused on tattooing. There are a lot of really, the APT's been around for a very, very long time. It's it's started by industry professionals. It's run by industry professionals. It's a trade organization. It is really a group that I personally feel like every tattoo artist that considers themselves a professional tattoo artist should be a part of. It's not an expensive thing to be a part of. It's a very positive place to be as a tattoo artist. The one thing I like the most about it is that whereas like if you're in these Facebook groups that are tattoo groups, there's a lot of negativity in there. There's not a lot of constructive criticism. There's not a lot of helping each other out kind of stuff. There is some of that, but it's not filled with that. Whereas the APT is very much filled with that kind of stuff. It's very much a brotherhood, sisterhood. It's a very much a place where there's a lot of unity and a lot of focused attention on the things that matter in the tattoo industry, the things that affect us as artists in the industry. And it's a place where we get to have a voice and be a part of those discussions. You know what I mean? We can
Yeah.
choose to be as involved or we can just be on the sidelines in observation mode if we want to. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about your experience with the APT and how long you've been a member and, the benefits that you see in regards to being in the APT. And then just overall, what's your message, in conclusion, what is your message to artists today? And what's kind of your parting words for the interview today?
Well, the APT is a great place for us to, like you said, assemble as an alliance of professional tattooists so that we can have one voice together. I think seeing a lot of people, seeing the amount of people that are collected together is impactful for regulation. If we're going to be doing any work in that vein or representing in that to that effect. So being together, I think, is important for just that reason. The other one is just camaraderie, right? Because we're all doing this, like you said about manufacturers, there's a little bit of competition and all. Same with tattoo artists, but we're all doing the same thing and we can learn from each other, so we can sharpen each other. So I think all of that I think is helpful for the APT. I've been part of the APT a little on and off since I think I joined and then wasn't for a few years and then joined back kind of actually recently since around the time of MoCRA. It actually was we were actually I was getting some information about MoCRA through APT, I think originally, because you can keep your finger on your pulse on the pulse of it. So, so much out in the real world, but they were actually putting a little bit of info out. So that was helpful. And I think you're right, Rob. I think just us being together, you could be involved or not, but part of what I think really matters is that as tattoo artists, we can lead, and we can lead because we get to. It's not a have to. It's not just what's required of me. It's like how to actually do what we're doing to the best of our ability. And since we're dealing with needles that go into skin and could actually create it, like we could spread disease, we could, put something in there forever. I think it's important to consider what we can do to bump up our game, or at least consider those minimal things. I've recently uh, upped my game by doing digital consents. I'm starting to line up with that. There's a lady named Kathy Monty. It's kathymonty.com, and she has digital consents for tattoo artists. And she'll take yours and put it in. A lot of people do this, right? We use different apps to do it, but she'll actually take it and do all that work for you, like not having to put it in a. And then using those digital consents is helpful because, like, if I'm going to take track of all those lots, or having it digitally, it actually makes it doable.
Right.
So part of it is, like, I think it could be overwhelming to people because they don't really know what's going on. So you're right. I think APT or being involved in AFTO, at least keeping your finger on the pulse of it, will be helpful. But then how do I actually implement it is sometimes when people really get a little lost and like, how is this really going to look? Well, like I said, the digital consents could be helpful, especially going forward as things kind of change. I was asked at the conference about, well, what about traceability? Do you have that in your consents? I actually do have some of that in my consents and how to deal with it afterwards. But do I have it as a part of my safety plan? That's something tattooers would be like, how do I even do that part? So I think all of that could look like, going forward, we could use some ink education. We could use some, how do we actually make this quality agreement happen in my shop, practical kind of information. And so I do have energy, and I know there's other people that have energy to put out some information to actually have there be like a hub for ink education. So stay tuned for some of that stuff, because there will be things that in the near future, I know that are going to be out there that aren't yet on ink education. So that's something that I think could be helpful. There is something out there already called what'sinmyink.com. You're familiar with that? So that's a research, tattoo ink research coordinated website. And we had Sasha Noble from the university and part of the Zwerk team, and they've done a ton of research on inks. And I do want to just touch on this once, that part of her research is photosensitivity. Some of these adverse events that we're noticing, the lymphatic thing specifically, has been traced back to laser removal.
Right.
So I just want to say that because that's super important. If some of this stuff getting transient, we put it in the skin, we hope it stays forever, we notice it doesn't, where does it all go? Is it happening because of sun exposure? Is it happening just because it's there? Is it happening because of anything else that happened to it? And laser is one of those things that is still being studied hugely in this area because there has been a lot of proof that it is the reason why we're seeing it in the lymphatic system.
Right.
Not going to say it's the only reason we're seeing it, but I just want to say that out loud because part of this can be considered in that, in those researchers, because people who know stuff are who I'll point you at, So I think research happening and continuing to happen and focusing on the needs of the manufacturer. So part of what I'm going to say too is, Rob, what do you want? What do you care about? What do manufacturers need? As an AFTO member, and I know we're doing a working group that's specifically on safety substantiation for products. Like, I think it's important to find out what the manufacturers want and what would help them, specifically when it comes to MoCRA. And, for tattoo artists, I guess tattoo artists and people in that manufacture, There are people, like I said about my farm, like consultants that help people jump through the hoops and meet FDA with a happy hand, a shaking hand, like where we're ready to go because we had somebody help us through this that knew what at least the requirements that were needed so that we can pass this. And for those little companies that you're talking about that might not, you think may or may not make it through this process, I would think that would be that. I mean, my farm isn't a really big farm. We have a couple of people working with us, but it's
Right.
not huge. So like, having to step up to that standard, um, I think all that helped me was my consultant. And that's how I made it. And that's how I got basically I can sell it, I can distribute to grocery stores. So, that there's consultants out there. Sudereg is one of them. Casey Stevenson's, who did that lecture with me, he's in AFTO, and his part in that is because that's kind of the work that he does with people, is try to set them up for success. From a tattoo artist point of view, I could point you at the same thing. If someone has a shop and they got a big laminine shop, they're like, how do I actually make this work in my shop with 12 artists or something? I would say you might want to get a relationship with someone that knows what you need initially to just establish it, and then you can upkeep it and figure out how you want to make it digital, or if there's something in the future that is available, for this. Basically creating this documentation will happen. It just might happen in a way that is a collective, and so we can come together and try to do that. Or it might be where you seek out a consultant and say, this is my specific organization and I want it to do this, help me do this, make this one thing for it so that I can meet this MoCRA need for my shop. So I do think that looking for someone to help you through that might not be a bad. You don't have to be alone in it. If that's APT, you just rubbing elbows with people, or if that's what you actually asking someone who that's their job, and again, I think that those resources are, if I didn't know, if I wasn't connected with a consultant for my industry, I would have felt very lost. I would have felt like it was an unachievable thing as a producer.
Right.
So I think in both those veins, I think that could be actually the initial help that's needed, because you have what, you have everything that is applicable, but the consultant knows how to apply it. And so
Right.
once you just learn wherever those roads meet, and actually what's funny is we're creating a roadmap right now. That roadmap is actually being constructed as we're talking. So it's not something that's super clear yet. Although it's there is some standards we have to meet, right? As MoCRA, it's just it being fully enforced. I feel is not here yet, but we have time. I feel like not a lot of time to get ahead of when regulations actually get here within the year. I feel that they've been talking about actually putting real regulations with, sections and numbers and titles on them. And so I feel like that's important for us to do. And having all those brains in one space is what's going to do it. I feel like you're saying when you're doing with this coalition, I think you getting that coalition together, and that coalition sitting at the AFTO table and representing could be something that's really helpful as well.
Yeah.
We do need all those players together, though. The documents will be written for the weakest link, though. And I'm just here as an artist doing what I do and really learning from other people. But I do encourage everybody to just be a leader and come to have this discussion with your clients. And like I said, get involved with those that are having that discussion, and question things. Like if you hear something that is a black and white, like, have the conversation. Don't just swallow it because someone that you think is cool said it, or just because it was got a million hits or it's viral. We know those things aren't always necessarily true. So educating yourself or being part of a group that does that. Like you said, there's lots of little groups, and that they're not toxic, that we're trying to be collaborative,
Right.
trying to be exclusive or trying to be inclusive. It's not about me, it's about us. It's cool that we have this rock star, industry, but to not take advantage of the client just because because they're not asking. and
Right.
actually give them more than what they're asking for, I think is what it could look like. Um, but yeah, I think you're being a leader, just doing what you're doing and having these open discussions. I really appreciate you doing it. It's pretty
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I'm excited for everything that's about. It looks like you got a lot of guests coming up and everything you've done so far. I think it's really a service to us. And I think that's really what just doing that, you're being a leader and you're just walking it out and being an example for us and what that looks like in the everyday world.
Yeah, to me, it's not really the focus, but it's just like the conversations I have with Sean all the time. Like, it's not necessarily that I always want to be doing this stuff. It's not always a comfortable space for me, or it's not necessarily always what I would choose to do when I get up every day. You know what I mean? But like,
Right.
to me, it's a very important. It's not. That doesn't even give it the emphasis that it needs. That's not even a strong enough emphasis. Very important. It's like it's a very necessary thing that has to happen. And unfortunately, there just aren't enough people willing to step up to the plate. Uh, from the manufacturing side, I'm talking specifically right now. Sean and I and guys like Tramp and Mario, those are the guys that have been passionate about it for a very long time. It's just a very overwhelming. Um, it's like looking at the top of Mount Everest and trying to figure out how the hell you get to the top of that thing. You know what I mean? Like, very
Okay.
overwhelming and intimidating most of the time. And it's like, even coming to like AFDO conference, you feel very out of your element when you go there for the first time. You're not around your normal crowd of people. You're around people that are like drug and food people and like suit and tie people, and you're going into this place and you're just not sure what to expect. But you got to be there. You got to have a voice there. You got to put your energy into this thing that's happening, because you're right. The shape of our industry is being dictated. The evolution is being dictated right now. And we don't have any power in that part of it, right? It's going to happen whether we choose to be a part of it or not. So recognizing that you can be a part of shaping that, just like you and that passion that you have for sculpting that clay, right? I mean, right now we have the opportunity to turn that into
Yeah.
what our vision of that sculpture looks like in the next 10 years. But if we don't step up to the plate and be the artisan that's helping craft that, then it ends up being something that we're not really finding aesthetically pleasing necessarily. And we don't want that, right? So when I say it's a very necessary thing, it's because it's a very necessary thing. You know what I mean? And we have to have leaders emerge in this space. And it's important to have these conversations. And they're not always comfortable conversations to have. It's not easy to talk about transparency and truth all the time, you know, because for a lot of people, that's a tough space to be in, because transparency and truth means vulnerability. And sometimes vulnerability is a really uncomfortable place.
Yeah. I had it happen within the last about like I was telling you about the last 3 or 6, it's about 3 months ago, where I approached two different ink manufacturers and asked them for the same things. One said, sure, let me get back to you. And he wrote me this. I had asked him for like a list of 5 things that MoCRA asked, to be compliant. Are you registered? Things like that. And he sent me back a statement with signed at the bottom. He didn't give me every single cert yet, but I can get that stuff to you, but like, I'm going to give you an attestation that we are within this. And then I got a response from another manufacturer literally within the same like hour. It was so funny because I approached them both a little bit differently in time. And then within the same hour, I got a response from somebody that said, it was like, why do you want this? Why are you even asking for an SDS sheet? And I said, well, what you gave me was like one sheet for the whole line. So I would like do you have one for each color? I assume they did. I mean, it's honestly kind of
They should.
needed at this point, right? And so, but the response was, I don't like how you're approaching it. And there was like, I was met with like resistance. And so I would encourage any artist that happens with them to just don't be discouraged, There's people like Rob out there. I really mean that. I'm not just like, there are people that care too, just like you do. So just know that you can continue to ask, and who knows, maybe that company will step up later and they'll be different later. But ultimately, I want to work with somebody that wants to work with me, just like with a tattoo client. So I'd say kind of don't feel like this is a new scenario. This is the same scenario. You're just trying to create a fair deal for your client and get transparency. And that's the word, really, transparency and collaboration, right? And if we can do
Right.
that, I think that good things will come of it. What you're talking about, it's funny because you're saying that there's not as many people showing up to the table. So I would just say, as rebels, right? If we see all these people not caring about tattooing standards or quality standards, let's be rebels and rebel against that and care. Be the cool kids. The new wave will be that dirty tattoos aren't cool anymore and clean and quality ink is. And let's just bring the cool back to quality ink, so we can all like literally live and have fun and not worry about getting sick from this, because I think we can. I don't think it's one or the other. I don't think it's throw out tattoo ink so
Hmm.
that you can to stay safe. I do not think that is the answer. I think it's keep the transparent companies doing what they're keep encouraging those that are doing the right thing and not adulterating on purpose, or telling you they have things in their ink that's not, or trying to swindle you. It's really about a fair deal for you too, just like you're giving a fair deal to your client. And I totally think it's achievable. I think even before a company hits all the standards they need to hit, I think you can at least start having those conversations and see who's an honest broker. It's
Yeah.
pretty easy. It's usually a 5-minute conversation. And some of the stuff I'm talking about implementing in the shop, it's not a huge shift. It could look like something like you adding things slowly over a couple months and having it done. But like I said, if someone wants to make a wave, just let's push against those that don't care, and let's just care and be cool and love people and be kind to people, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I would tell you too to be patient with manufacturers. If
Yeah.
you're going to manufacturers and you're asking them for things, understand that these regulations are all very new to the manufacturers. They're manufacturers that care are trying to get into compliance. They're trying to learn what MoCRA wants from them, what they need. But on a very base level, if you can't go to a manufacturer and get an SDS sheet from them, because that's a very basic thing that even outside of any regulation that any manufacturer should be able to provide for their product. I mean, that's a very basic thing that should be available no matter what. So if a manufacturer doesn't give you an SDS sheet, that's a big red flag. Now, don't expect them to necessarily have like facility registrations necessarily completed, because they
Right.
may not have that part done. They may not have all their product registrations completely done with the FDA, but they may be working on those things. It might be works in process. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily a red flag if they don't have those things, but just ask them if they're working on those things. And the answer should be yes. By the
Yes.
way, here's our SDS sheets, and we'll tell you whatever you want to know about our products. And yes, we are working on these things for sure.
Yeah, I
So,
love that. That's totally true. Like, yeah, what do you care about? And the thing is I've gotten engagement, and like I said, I've gotten resistant, and I just align with those that I feel like want to do business with me. And I do think maybe that those companies that are kind of swindling and are trying to take advantage, um, they either have to step up or they'll fall off the face, and I think that's okay with me. Um, but I do believe that we can get the smoker, when one smoker's on the other side, I feel like we're going to have all of our inks, if not some of the ones that were lost through reach. And I know you'll see those steps when it gets closer to it, but I think the first ones are just the 7 elements of MoCRA, which are safety substantiation first. So not even proving everything other than just that I've at least substantiated, that
well, I
there's.
feel like AFDO's working on things for MoCRA that MoCRA's not even asking for yet, right? So that's the benefit in AFDO, is that AFDO's kind of the cart before the horse, right? So like right now, MoCRA's just saying, hey, you need to register your facility, you need to register your products, and we need to have transparency about what's in your products. That's really like that's what their focus is right now. And obviously they're going to be focused on all these other things. Like, if they come into your facility right now, they want to see your sterilization certs, they want to see your microbial test, they want to see your heavy metal testing, they want to see your storage procedures, they want to see your recall process. I have all that. A lot of manufacturers aren't that far along in the process yet. You know what I mean? They're still working to get those pieces in place. I think that's where AFTO has kind of been a very big benefit with these working groups to try to help understand and navigate through those parts of the processes. But my whole point earlier when I said that I think you'll start seeing manufacturers fall off is that either one, they're just not going to have interest in dedicating the resources required to making those things happen. It's not valuable enough to them, right? They're not a big enough company to want to have to do that, right? They're not going to want to invest if you go look at companies that are like state of the art manufacturing facilities, I mean, there's millions of dollars invested in those operations, and
Right.
a lot of people don't have millions of dollars to invest in those operations. So some of the ink manufacturers that are smaller guys are just going to naturally have to go and contract manufacture with the bigger players in the game. That's just the way it's going to happen. And that's not a negative thing. That's actually a good thing for them because they can take comfort knowing that the bigger manufacturers have checked all the boxes and that the product that they're actually manufacturing is a safe product. It's a tested product. It's
Right.
good. You know what I mean? That you will be able to put your name on a good product that you can stand behind comfortably and confidently.
And there's a such a thing as formulations, right? So you could have a private label that you get the exact blue from that company, or you could actually formulate something that's a little different and have a company do that for you. So it doesn't mean that it's limiting to those smaller companies,
No,
correct?
you can have complete control of your brand and everything, your whole color palette and all that. You just don't internally manufacture your product. You put it in the hands of someone that knows what they're doing, and they have all the certifications and the necessary documentation to be able to do it right. They're on par with the FDA, they're on par with REACH regulations. They've done all that work. They've invested that time and that energy and the resources into that.
And that's something that I learned in doing, in considering what would it look like to have a practical agreement from my supplier is a change control, meaning I ask my supplier, if you ever change it, would you tell me? And then they agree to that. And that to me is one of the biggest things that matters in all of the, interactions with that supplier is like, so when they change it, because the thing is things change, right? And if they change, I want to know about it. So that's the other part that I think is super important. I didn't mention. So all of these documents, I think actually aren't a way to like close doors or make red tape for anybody. And this is something I've heard said before. So it's not meant to really make red tape. It's actually it's to like solidify that our arrangement is good, right? It's so that it works. I tell this to my contractors or the artists that work for me is like, whatever we do here has to work out good for both of us. And in having that kind of relationship, I think it gives me a lot of ease, in going through and going forward, more long-term ease.
Right.
And the one thing that I know it was said in our presentation, and I'll say it here just because I think it's pertinent to what you're asking, is that, and this is something that Ken Stevenson said, and he said before, but it's just really important for like considering what kind of documentation we're really going to adopt as far as tattoo artist from my supplier, because it's normal to have approved suppliers when you're doing any kind of business. Like I've approved them already. In
Right.
fact, I even do that with a lot of my other products. So I don't buy my soap from the farmer's market. Although I bet that soap's good. I'm not trying to talk crap about that soap lady.
It is
Love
good.
going to people who have goat farms and they have soap, and you're like, I'll buy that out of your closet.
Good stuff.
Um, I've literally done that. But I go and buy my soap. I don't even buy if I have a brand name, I don't go and buy it out of somebody's van that drives around my city. I buy
Right.
from the company knowing, because I want to have a little bit of control on that. And so that's kind of what's happening in that paperwork and that process, is not trying to be red tape, not trying to be, more work or annoying. And it's actually something that really actually bolsters, what you're doing. So you don't have to have a case of soap that is so hot that it all exploded, and now you have no soap that you can sell because all the seals are broken.
Right.
So it's just like simple things like that cost money if you do it wrong, and cost you clients over a period of years, and ultimately give you a bad reputation if you do it really wrong for a long time. I think having good reputations and having like good business is always good business. And so I try to just do really good business every single time. And that actually eliminates a lot of all the other stuff that could take away from me in a long-term, basis. So I guess what I was going to say is something that it is a quote out of that presentation we did, but Casey says to solve some of this by building a shared expectation. So if we can all get together and like consider what our expectations are, like you were just mentioning about this real big picture and more immediate picture. So it has shared expectations, and then drafting documentation that aligns not with where we are right now, but where we are headed.
Right. It's a good way to put it.
I mean, it's exactly what you were saying, just from a different angle, but that's it, so let's do this thing, create some shared expectations.
Well, people like you are helping get that across the finish line. I want to thank you for taking time with me today. We went well over the allotted time, so I thank you for spending extra time with me today than what we actually scheduled. It's been a very good conversation. I feel like it's been very packed full of information that needs to be heard by people. So that was my hope with getting you on the podcast, was being able to just kind of keep this dialogue going and keep this educational content flowing. And if people want to get in touch with you directly, what's the best way? How do people find you on the social media, interwebs, whatever? What do you want to?
Worldwide interwebs.
Yeah.
AOKtattoo.com is my website. Anything is linked from there, but AOK Tattoo is my handle on Instagram and Facebook. I'm on some other social media. It's all AOK Tattoo.
Cool. Well, thank you for taking time with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's a total honor and pleasure.
Yeah.
You are a treasure as a person, but to our industry as well. I really thank you for serving in this way, and look forward to whatever else you're up to.
Well, the feeling is very mutual. Thank you very much. And it's been great getting to know you better today, and also just working with you in AFDO. And I know we've got a working group coming up on Thursday, so I'll see you again in a couple days.
All right. Have a great one.
You too. Thank you so much. That's a wrap for this episode of The Business of Tattooing. I appreciate you tuning in and being part of this journey to level up the industry one conversation at a time. If you found value in today's episode, do me a favor. Subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another artist who could use this knowledge. Got questions or topics you want me to cover? Hit me up on Instagram at NoFlashNinja or email me at rob@electrumsupply.com. And remember, tattooing is an art, but running a successful business is a skill. Keep pushing, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time on The Business of Tattooing.